The afternoon sun was shining over the big city. A boy with dark hair gathered into a ponytail walked into a flower store. He looked at one of the plants standing on a shelf among the others. Looking at the plant, the guy asked, "Zamio kulkas?" The saleswoman, dressed in a green apron, said with a smile that the leaves of this plant looked like a coin, which is why it is also called a money tree, and people often give it as a gift for starting a business. She had long blonde hair and big pointed ears. The guy asked him to give him one. The radio announcer was talking about strange storms on the beach in the town of Saksho. He said that the government claimed it was a natural phenomenon. Turning off the radio, the saleswoman asked who could believe that such a storm was just a natural process. The protagonist, ignoring her words, fought as expected. The aftermath of a battle of this magnitude could not be hidden so easily. He stood in the air in front of a huge dragon that was raising large bursts of water with the movements of its tail. Lightning flashed in the sky and several tornadoes roamed the surface of the water. Holding a knife with a purple blade in his hand, the main character said that it had been quite a while fighting the dragon. He said with a cold stare, hunting 2 dragons in one day. Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, and the 2 dragons rushed to attack each other at the same time as the protagonist. The lightning struck the sea surface with a bright flash. The saleswoman, wrapping the protagonist's purchase in a package, said with a smile that their world was strange. She asked if he agreed. The protagonist remained silent as he held out his hand for his purchase. Taking the plant package in his hand, he said he was in complete agreement. The protagonist left the flower store. Putting his hand in his pants pocket, he looked away. An orange cab car stopped in front of him. The protagonist asked for a ride to Seoul. Sitting in the car and looking out the window, he pondered about the strange world. The road in front of them was crossed by many people of different kinds, whether they were beastmen or orcs. The protagonist wondered if this world was normal. One guy stopped in the middle of the road crossing and looked up into the sky, and the protagonist wondered what kind of world was considered normal then. The cab driver said it didn't look like he was here for a vacation. He asked what brought him here. The protagonist replied, "Nothing much." He said he was here for work. The cab continued down the city road. This story is about a distant star on the edge of the galaxy. A girl with pointy ears next to a little fairy stood in front of a holographic screen. People in white robes stood around a guy stripped down to his underwear, chained to a wooden cross. One of them had a knife in his hand and there was some kind of ritual circle on the floor. This story is also about a man of the man who has been working for 800 years. Closing his eyes, the main character said that he really didn't want to work. The cab driver, a green-skinned orc, agreed with him. He asked if it wasn't all about food and the good life. A giant structure was visible on the city skyline, with a blue beam of light shooting out into the sky from it. The cab driver said that in this world he has to work just to survive. The main character said it seems like everywhere he goes, everyone has the same thoughts. He said he didn't want to work. From the dimly lit hallway, the protagonist could be seen in the office. Next to the office was written, "Examining a patient." The protagonist said it was so boring, it was driving him crazy. He asked if there was no option to live without working. The doctor, sitting at his desk, said he seemed burned out. The main character, Jun, sat on a chair, looking tiredly somewhere to the side. Lowering his gaze, he said that he had been doing this job for too long. Jun asked if it was right to live like this. Pressing the keys on the keyboard, the doctor said, "It seems like he's already mentally tired." He said, "Just like a rubber band, if you pull it long enough, it loses tension." The doctor typed a diagnosis on the computer, emotional burnout syndrome. He said his mind needed rest, but he was unable to do so. Handing the protagonist a pack of pills, he told him to just take them like he used to. Looking at the pills in his hand, the protagonist repeated his words. Looking at him with bright yellow eyes and moving his fins, the doctor told him that his next visit would be in 23 years. Leaning back in his chair, he said that, therefore, the appointment would also be for 23 years. As he continued typing on the keyboard, he asked if he had any other questions. The protagonist rose from his chair and said he was leaving. Sleepily stretching, the doctor told him that they would see each other in 23 years. Resting his face on his palm, the doctor looked at the holographic screen and thought that he didn't believe it was possible to live without working, because if he doesn't work, he will die. Jun walked outside and lifted his head up. The sun was shining brightly in the blue sky, and the skyscrapers that could be seen from behind the trees glistened in the daylight. People were relaxing on the grass, adults were lying down and walking around, and children were running around. The main character put his hands in his pockets and said that it was a good day. There was a sound and the people in the crowd said about the danger alert and asking the residents to go to the shelter. The phone in the protagonist's pocket rang. Lee Min-jun picked up the receiver, putting the phone to his ear. Kathy told him that a job had come up. The protagonist asked if it was a bank robbery. Sitting in a dark room full of monitors and holding a piece of paper in her hand, she said that she couldn't expect anything less from Korea's best agent. The protagonist asked about payment. Kathy said the payment would be the same as last time. Lee Min-jun, hanging up the phone, said it was very boring. Suddenly, he disappeared, leaving behind only a light blue glow, which also quickly disappeared. The police officers shouted for everyone to stand back and that the safety of the citizens was most important. A large orc dressed in body armor stood with a threatening expression on his face. The protagonist called out to Chungpul, and the latter turned around abruptly. He saw Lee Min-jun, and the latter asked him if the culprit was alone. Scratching his bald head, Chungpul said he was alone. The protagonist told him that he was a police inspector, so he should make a less scary expression. Chungpul said he always has that face. Inspector Park Chungpul, race orc. He said judging from the last refugee, there are only 4 hostages, and all are unconscious except one. The protagonist walked past the inspector and said he would take over. Chungpul asked what he was talking about. Exhaling, Lee Min-jun said, of course, this case. Looking after him, Chungpul thought that he couldn't believe that it wasn't the police who would take care of it, but the protagonist who is an agent of the immigration department. Lee Min-jun was standing in front of a tall multi-story building, and the wind was fluttering his jacket. He stuck his hand into the inside pocket of his jacket and threw a few pieces of paper with red writing into the air. The pieces of paper were enveloped in blue flames. Looking at the bright blue light, people in the crowd exclaimed that it was magic. The protagonist glanced back and said that he had gone inside. Chungpul ordered to get the residents out of here because the immigration department would solve everything. Someone asked about magic and Chungpul turned around. A guy with short hair asked if the immigration department doesn't catch foreign criminals. He asked how they ended up here. Chungpul, folding his arms across his chest, asked if he hadn't learned in school the difference between an immigration office and an immigration department. He asked what he was even doing in school. Awkwardly averting his gaze, the kid said he was working night shifts, so he was busy sleeping through classes. With tears coming out of his eyes, he said he didn't even have enough time to make money. He asked how he should even have enough time to study. Chungpul, sweating nervously, thought that he shouldn't have asked that. Closing his eyes, he began to explain the difference between the immigration office and the immigration department. Like he said, the immigration office handles complaints regarding foreigners, but an immigration department agent like Lee Min-jun deals with special foreigners. The guy asked about special foreigners. Chungpul said they deal with people coming from overseas. The guy said, that means inside the bank. Chungpul, agreeing, said, an illegal immigrant on another level, a visitor from very far away places. A guy in a t-shirt, sports pants and flip-flops was dragging a woman by her hair, who left a bloody trail behind her on the floor. The protagonist, while in a dark room, said, no Kengu, 21 years old, unemployed. Looking at his phone screen, he said that he awakened and registered as a special ability user last year, and used that as an opportunity to go work for a security company, but failed. Lifting his gaze from his phone, Lee Min-jun said, special. A bench, shrouded in a bright green light, was rapidly approaching him. The protagonist dodged and the piece of furniture flew past him, leaving a bright green trail in the air. Looking in the direction the attack came from, he said it was telekinesis. The guy, still holding the woman by the hair, asked who told him he could come in here. He tilted his head sideways madly, his eyes glowing green, and he asked if he had gotten rid of the police and entered here by himself. Lee Min-jun told him to release the hostage first. The guy irritably clenched his lips and teeth and told him to back off. The protagonist said that he promised him that he wouldn't kill him if he surrendered right now. He added that he couldn't promise that if he did anything to the hostage. Putting his palm to his face, the guy told him to shut up and do what he tells him. The protagonist, without taking his hands out of his pockets, told him to let him go, and this was his last chance. The guy, cursing irritably, in a calm but angry tone, told him to shut up. Raising a palm shrouded in green light, he asked if he thought he was joking. He asked if he thought he could treat him like garbage just because he was unemployed. Lifting the furniture around him into the air with telekinesis, the guy yelled that he thought his life would be turned upside down with the advent of this power, but he can't even get a job. He asked how he was supposed to live on the $65 a month he was given as a scholarship. He angrily asked if he understood what it was like to live like that. Swinging his hand, the guy with tears on his face asked why he alone had to suffer. He shouted that his life was useless. The expression on his face suddenly relaxed and he thought about the fact that he had come here to collect his scholarship, but some grandmother told him that he had something on his back and was trying to take it off. The guy thought he felt pain as she touched it. Stopping where he was, he tried to remember what happened after that. An evil laugh sounded in the hallway. The grandmother the boy was holding by the hair opened her eyes that were glowing green, and she said with a smirk, "Not bad." She said he'd figured her out at first sight. The guy looked at her with a misunderstanding and frightened look. He took his hand away from his grandmother and a green substance came out of her neck and stuck to his hand. The boy, jumping back frightened, asked what it was. The grandmother, smiling evilly, said he had a good sniff for an immigration dog. The protagonist replied to her that he would be a fool not to notice it. A green substance came out from behind Grandma's back, and she, tilting her head sideways, said he did a good job of brainwashing her. She said she thought he was just saying all these stupid things for no reason, but he was delivering his words under her hypnosis. Grandma grinned at the boy, who fell to the floor in horror, her face contorted with a horrifying grimace. The guy was pierced with nightmarish pain. The veins on his face ballooned and his eyes rolled back. The green substance emanating from the older woman pulsed. It was penetrating under the skin of the guy who was crying out for help. Jun, rolling up the sleeves of his jacket, said, "The criminal from the Odin's dimension that everyone is out to get, Etrella Daphne. 3 attempted murders, 12 murders, 49 robberies, possession of contraband, and entering a primitive dimension without authorization." Pulling out a purple knife from behind his back, the protagonist said that this was not counting all the crimes she had committed on Earth. His knife gave off a light purple glow, and the protagonist said that he was giving her a chance and he blew it. Jun squinted his tired eyes and grabbed the knife blade with his hand. He swung the knife, slicing his palm, from which blood spurted out. Scarlet blood spurted onto the floor. The elderly woman looking at him thought that this sinister aura meant he possessed dark magic. Dark magic comes from pain or sacrifice condensed by absorbed life force. This magic is forbidden in some countries, but allowed in the case of self-sacrifice for a good cause or in self-defense. Grinning widely, Etrella thought that the life force he would expend would never be recovered again. The green limbs sucked something out of the guy lying on the ground, and Etrella thought how much life force there was in humans. The sharp green tentacles rushed forward, and she said with a wicked grin that she would make that power hers too. The main character with a calm face said some words. Sharp tentacles surrounded the protagonist. The blood on the floor began to bubble and froth. From the pool of blood, a large hand with sharp claws suddenly appeared. The hand struck the ground with force, and a huge monster surrounded by a red aura appeared from the floor. Etrella, sweating nervously, exclaimed that this was unbelievable. She thought about how an ordinary person could use so much dark magic, and how much life force it expended. The main character's body was desiccated, and bones could be seen through the blackened skin. Etrella thought he spent half his life just to deal with her. She asked fearfully what he was. The protagonist's eyes glowed red, and he said with an ominous calmness that he wasn't sure. Jun stood with his hands folded in his pants pockets. Etrella thought that she didn't fully understand what he wanted to do. She attacked with her green tentacles, thinking that she wouldn't sit idly by either. The huge monster approached her, severing her tentacles with its arms. Etrella looked fearfully and incomprehensibly at the monster approaching her. The monster tore her apart with its hands. Etrella screamed in fear and pain. The monster continued to tear her to pieces and the main character began to slowly approach. Etrella's severed head was lying on the floor, next to the rest of the severed bloody body parts, thinking that he was really strong. The protagonist asked if it hurt, and if it was worse than she expected. Etrella fearfully shouted for him to wait and told him that she would repay him if he let her live. Jun asked how she could repay him. She asked if he knew why there were so many criminals gathered on Earth. She said that a major dimensional soothsayer once prophesied that in the farthest corners of the dimension, there was a part of a soul dropped by the worst criminal in history. Etrella said she had a clue that would lead him to that soul, and there would be a riotous line behind that bounty if he wanted to sell it. Smiling nervously, she began to talk about what would happen if he promised her that he would let her live. The protagonist interrupted her and, picking his little finger in his ear, said that it interested him. He said if he tried to sell it, he'd immediately be wanted by the committee, especially since he already had someone on his hands. Running his hand through his hair, Jun said that she was trying to cheat him to the brink of death. Looking at his hand, Etrella exclaimed that it couldn't be. His body was no longer desiccated and had returned to its original appearance. The life force that had fallen victim to dark magic would no longer be restored. This is the law of the universe. Etrella thought about how this was impossible. Looking fearfully at the protagonist, she asked what race he was. The monster behind the protagonist swung his hand. Jun said that he had already told her that he didn't know. The monster swung his hand, splattering blood all over the room. Looking at his hand, the protagonist thought about how many extraterrestrial criminals he had on his account. He thought that he couldn't count them anymore. Lee Min-jun with a tired look thought that he was tired of it all. Looking at the guy lying on the floor, he said that the hostage was still alive. The protagonist lowered his gaze down. Looking at the pool of blood, he thought, such a crime would only be forgiven for robbing a couple banks. He said he envied them. A cloud of dust surrounded the building outside. A crowd of people looked at the blue magic surrounding the building. Lee Min-jun walked out of the building while passing through the dust cloud. Chongpul, noticing him, asked if it was over. The protagonist said and asked him to take care of the aftermath. Chongpul asked, putting his hands on his hips, what about the hostage? Looking away, Lee Min-jun said that he was at least alive. Rubbing his chin, Chongpul said he was glad he wasn't dead or a mugger, because it would have been hard to look at a young guy with a hole in his head. He looked questioningly at the protagonist. The protagonist said he already had gunshots all over his body. Chongpul put his hand on his face. Turning around, Lee Min-jun said that he was saying that it's hard to work here with such an attitude. He suggested that he should have a drink together sometime. Folding his arms across his chest, Chongpul agreed with a smile and told him to be careful. The protagonist's phone rang and the display showed the name Kathy. Lee Min-jun pulled down the sleeves of his jacket. There was a message on the phone. The Privatization Service Department of the City Administration, Korea Migration Bureau. Your account has been sent 22,354,000 won. The protagonist said they pay promptly. An orange cab stopped in front of him. Lee Min-jun approached the cab, raising his hand. The driver asked where they were going. The protagonist asked to be taken to a bookstore. He thought about the fact that everyone knows about him. A famous agent of the Immigration Bureau, 99% of cases are successful. A holographic dialogue box appeared in front of Lee Min-jun's face. It read, Detainee Questionnaire, Identifier, ASIF 666, Dispatch, Multidimensional Intelligence Transfer Committee, Location, Earth, Type of Employment, Sentenced to Correctional Labor, a felon under limited mind-affecting influence. This is what few people know about. Hidden identity, name and race, Lee Min-jun, human. He is not human. Lee Min-jun once committed a crime and was arrested instead of just killing him on the spot. His body and mind were taken from him, sentenced to reformatory labor. All the important work, too dirty for other workers, is given to people like them, people with altered times. The protagonist glanced at the dialogue box that reported the activation of a memory operation. Work is a prison, and quitting is a release. Deposit, plus 200 talent. Every time he does his job in this hole called Earth, he gets the universal currency talent. The protagonist leans back in his seat. The dialogue box says, Transfer completed, 2,000 talent withdrawn. Tax Collection Center. A transaction has been made from your account. The prisoner pays taxes. Balance, 21,525 talent. Please be careful. You will be charged a fee if your account reaches a minus. If you delay payment, you will be sentenced to death. Payoff. Bail for immediate release, 5,124,990 talent. With a sideways glance, Lee Min-jun thought about the 5 million talent. Here, the meaning of the payoffs is different from on Earth. There, they are paid upon retirement, but here, they have to pay them themselves to retire. The reward he received for today's order would likely only be a couple thousand talent. Taking the sand in his hand, the protagonist let it pass through his fingers. Since earning talent turns into hell once one becomes a prisoner, the thought of stealing Earth currency, exchanging it for talent, and paying for the release still comes up one day. An orange cab was traveling down a city street. The driver glanced at the protagonist through the view mirror, who in his eyes was just waving his hand through the air. Lee Min-jun thought that he didn't want to live this kind of life and he was tired of it. Prisoner's Guide. Prisoners can legally obtain talent in the following ways: capturing or killing a wanted criminal. Special assignment from the Bureau, reward amount depending on case. Looking at the list of missions, Lee Min-jun thought that the payout amount for the missions is not even close to 5 million. Noticing something, he opened his eyes. On the dialogue box was a mission, confidential. Obtain and deliver the soul of a criminal with the identification number ASIF 1 to 7 million talent. The protagonist remembered the words that a major dimension soothsayer had once prophesied, that in the farthest corners of the dimension was a part of the soul left behind by the worst criminal in history. The protagonist thought, if only he could accomplish this mission. Putting his hand to his face, Lee Min-jun grinned bitterly. The driver told him he must be having a tough time at work, but he must hang in there. The protagonist said it was time for him to get out of there because he was getting stale. he thought. Who knew he would be working there for 800 years? Folding them in front of his face, Lee Min-jun thought that now he would definitely leave this company. The balding policeman sitting behind the desk asked Chongpul if he knew the 3 most effective ways to kill a superior. Chongpul folded his hands behind his back, looked away and said he wasn't sure, but probably a headshot, slit his throat, or use his powers. The man said no. Raising his index finger he said, do a bad job so he dies of hypertension, make a mess doing the wrong job so he gets fired and starves to death, and ignore the chain of command and talking bad about the chief. The man put something on the table and said, arrange such a neurosis for the boss that he will get cancer and die. Chongpul asked why asking for more manpower is nonsense, because the 4th Brigade area is too dangerous for civilian personnel. The man jumped up from his seat and shouted that he was the one who thought so. Gritting his teeth, he told him to forget it, stop annoying him and get out of his sight. Chongpul picked up some papers the man pointed to and asked what these were. The man said that this case was assigned to the 2nd Brigade, but he would take it over. Flipping through the papers, Chongpul asked, was the man missing? He said they were already short of workers and now this. Angrily throwing the papers around, the man shouted at him to stop refusing and he would do it even if they lacked something. Chongpul looked at the papers with a grim face. Exhaling, the man asked why he was still standing here and if he had forgotten something. He irritably asked why the orcs were so slow and annoyed him so much. Holding the papers in his hand, Chongpul said he was just leaving. Clouds floated across the blue sky above the building with the large sign. The protagonist entered by opening the door. Someone asked, did you come? Lee Min-jun turned towards the voice. Kathy, 25 years old, name, Katarina Kan, Lee Min-jun's assistant. She had straight dark hair, blue eyes, and was sitting on the couch with a newspaper in her hands, dressed in a pink business suit, folding her leg over her foot. She wondered when he would finally change his cell phone. Placing the newspaper on the couch, Kathy asked if he knew how tedious it was to text individually. Showing him her phone screen, she said that her second most important contact on her phone was him, higher on the list even than her mom. The protagonist asked who came first. Kathy said the credit card company. Noticing a box on the table, the protagonist asked what it was. Kathy, raising her index finger, said she picked it up along the way. Lee Min-jun opened the box, which turned out to be full of potatoes, and asked how many potatoes she bought. And why would a person who lives alone need so many potatoes in the first place? Kathy said, to share with a guy who also lives alone. She said he must like cheap food because he's an old man now. Sighing, the protagonist told her not to be a spender and live more frugally. He asked since she came here, she must have come for work. Picking up a blue folder, Kathy said with a smile that he had guessed. Holding out the folder to him, she said that she had asked the Immigration Bureau to hold off because she wasn't sure if he would take the case. Lee Min-jun said since she said that, it means there's something questionable here. He asked about the missing person. Kathy said it's the president of Hessen Industries, Yan Taejun. His company has a revenue of 300 billion, but he hasn't shown up for work since last week, as if he's vanished. The bureau suspects he may be an alien living on Earth without papers. Showing a drawing of an alien with money, Kathy said they need proof even if he doesn't come back, since without it the government can't claim his stock. The protagonist asked what it was, and she said it was an alien. Lee Min-jun, looking at the papers, asked if he had any heir. Kathy said he doesn't have any close relatives, and they say there is a will, but the bureau has to get it first. The protagonist, without taking his eyes off the papers, said if inheritance is possible without blood relation, it seems they want to get it before the will is even found. The protagonist tapped Kathy in the face who got too close to him and told her to back off. He said if he brought something as boring as a missing person, maybe the government badly needs that stock. Lee Min-jun got up from his seat. Turning around, he said maybe it would be good to get rid of the debts this time. Leaving, he told her to remember to close the door before leaving. Kathy sat down on the table and asked if he would start right away. Looking at the potato in her hand, she said he was a workaholic. Lee Min-jun walked out of the building and saw a boy with green skin sweeping the asphalt. He called out to him, calling him Donchul. Donchul said hello to him, calling him master. The protagonist shouted to him that he asked him to stop calling him master because that's not how people would understand them. Embarrassed, Donchul looked away and said that the pronunciation was very difficult. He said he gets confused because his boss is on the first floor. Pointing his finger at the protagonist, Donchul said that the boss is on the first floor and the master is on the second floor. The protagonist asked why Lakefield needed to introduce him as the owner of the store. Turning around, he told him to think of something other than the owner. Bowing, Donchul told him to take care of himself. The protagonist entered the room and noticed a cactus standing on a shelf. He exclaimed that he had managed to bring it to life. He said that they were elves for a reason. A man with pointy ears and long blonde hair asked about his arrival. His face looked tired, and as he sat on the floor he told him not to touch him any more other plants. He said, "I'm not sure what you are doing, but could a cactus get so dry?" Lakefield, the elf boss of the Sangroku bookstore, the protagonist, scratching the back of his head awkwardly, said that he didn't buy it and it was given to him by Kathy. Lakefield irritably shouted that it was a bookstore, not a vegetable garden. Taking a seat next to him, Yeon-jun asked how Donchul was doing. Donchul was vigorously sweeping the asphalt, raising dust into the air. Lakefield said, "Employee of the Year." The protagonist agreed with a smile. Turning to him, Lakefield asked how he could help him because he didn't feel like he had stopped by just to talk. Yeon-jun said that he had something he needed to look into, and that was exactly his area of expertise. He used to be their agent, so he's a quick thinker. Lakefield said, "If you ask for it." The protagonist handed him a blue folder and said he would reduce his rent in return. Lakefield thanked him but said his pride would not allow him. He added that if he reduced it, he would have to pay virtually nothing. Lakefield asked with a smile, "Would you help me?" A stream of water appeared in the air in front of him, from which a very small girl with blonde hair dressed in a white dress appeared. The protagonist thought, "They say when you summon an elemental spirit, they take the form of the person misses the most." He asked what the secret was to summoning the spirit so quickly. Lakefield said, "Attention and practice." Lakefield told the spirit a piece of paper with a portrait and information about the missing person. He asked if it could find this person. Laughing, the spirit flew out of the room, leaving a blue trail behind it. Handing the blue folder back to the protagonist, he said he would contact him as soon as he got an answer. The protagonist thanked him. Birds flew in the darkened sky, colored with purple and pink tones. There was a knock on the door. Donchul peeped into the room saying that the boss was asking for him. The main character said, "Already." Yeon-jun entered the bookstore and asked how things were going. Lakefield took one look at him and said that he had found it. The protagonist exclaimed that he was the best in the business. Lakefield asked why he was looking for this man. Yeon-jun said, "To interrogate him." Lakefield said, "Then they need an expert in another case." The protagonist looked at him in surprise. Looking at him, Lakefield said, "It doesn't look like he's breathing. He's dead." The protagonist asked if it was human. Lakefield said he wasn't sure. It's hard to call something like that a person. The body of a man in a business suit with bare feet was hanging from a tree. The protagonist, keeping his hands in his pockets, looked at the body. The sun was shining, peeking out from behind the horizon. Crouching on the ground next to the body, Yeon-jun said over the phone that he had searched all he could but only found a letter in his pocket. And other than mentioning the will, there was nothing useful in it. He asked if the Immigration Bureau had found the will yet. Kathy said she had heard that it was kept at the main office of the Changchun Main Bank. Yeon-jun said that since it's there, they can't get it, and it's better to forget about the will for now and check Yan Tae-jun's house instead. Kathy said she understood and she would contact the bureau and request a visit. The protagonist thought, "We should try to backtrack if it becomes difficult to prove he's an alien." Chongpul was standing next to the gate of a rich house. He asked the protagonist what he was doing there. Yeon-jun looked at Chongpul in amazement. The man in a business suit with pointy ears and glasses said that he was thinking about how to make it all work since they had both submitted a visitation request, and the fact that they already knew each other made things a lot easier. Opening the car door, he told them to handle it on their own and then just return the keys. Chongpul asked, "Double booking?" The protagonist, looking at his phone, asked to be allowed to clarify. Chongpul opened the door and asked what there was to clarify. He said that they would just give him one to pick up. Clenching his fist, Chongpul said that was to be expected since the leader of the 2nd Brigade had relayed it to him. The protagonist asked, so the other brigade was doing it first. Chongpul said there was a recent spike in missing elves, so the 2nd Brigade was sent to the Special Investigation Headquarters. The officer with the bald head was asleep in his chair, and Chongpul said that the missing person case was left to loners like them, and orcs went missing daily. As he walked up the stairs, he said that the leader of the 2nd Brigade seemed to have figured out that honors for the case would go to the Bureau, and so dropped the case on them. The protagonist said that, frankly, he was glad to be assigned to him. Smiling, he said that he was much better to work with than those empty-headed people. Chongpul, turning around, said that he appreciated his words. His phone rang and he saw that it was the chief calling him. He picked up the phone and the chief shouted to him that someone from the bureau must be there and they said to cooperate. Chongpul with a furious face calmly said, he understood. The chief asked what he said, but he hung up. Yeon-jun offered to share the reward after the investigation is completed. Chongpul said that with their relationship, he could just buy him a drink. Smiling, the protagonist said then they would earn the drinks. He examined the shelf under the huge TV built into the wall. Climbing on top of them, Lee Min-jun looked around. Chongpul was sitting at a computer in a dark room full of bookshelves. The protagonist was trying to get a book from the top shelf that he couldn't reach. Chongpul called out to him, holding a flash drive in his hand, and said that he would send him a copy of the hard drive tomorrow. Closing the book, Lee Min-jun said he would leave it to him. Hearing a sound, they turned around. Chongpul said it sounded like crying, and ego swords make similar sounds. The protagonist asked him to be quiet for a second. As he listened, he thought it might be a clue. They walked through the house in the direction of the sound. Seeing something, they opened their eyes in amazement. The sound was coming from a frying pan hanging in the kitchen. Taking the pan in his hand, Chongpul asked why the sword cry was coming from the pan. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and froze. Chongpul threw the skillet to the floor with a scream. The protagonist said it scared him and asked what happened and if it was talking. Chongpul said that it was indeed talking. Picking up the ambulance from the floor, Lee Min-jun asked why throw it right away. Chongpul said that this skillet makes very strange noises. The protagonist took the skillet in his hand and it started making moaning sounds. He, while swearing, also threw the frying pan on the floor with force. They silently looked at the frying pan lying on the floor. Lee Min-jun exhaled and picked up the groaning pan from the floor. Looking at the frying pan, he asked what it was. The frying pan smiled and thanked him for asking, and he is a great cook from the Elidum dimension. He said it contained a memory copy of Dignova Al-Chatiku, a cooking utensil with built-in artificial intelligence. The protagonist pressed his lips together in fury. The frying pan continued to groan in his hand. Looking at the body hanging from the tree, Lee Min-jun said that they had done a good job. Frowning, he thought about the homunculi. He thought since they used the same DNA that Chairman Yan Tae-jun had, the results would be positive if they decided to run a test. The protagonist wondered why on earth they hung the fake in the forest a week after it went missing. Why would someone want to do that? If Yan Tae-jun's death is revealed, the only one who benefits is the heir who will get that 300 billion. The loser will be the country that can't get their hands on the illegal alien's wealth. Even if Yan Tae-jun is the alien who dangled the fake, it is literally impossible for a company worth 300 billion to create a homunculus. You have to be one of the 7 richest people in Korea or have some technology to accomplish such a thing. So how much are Yan Tae-jun's shares worth that they are creating this problem? The protagonist thought, now that the homunculus is involved in all this, the situation is getting out of control. At this rate, he'd better not get involved. But it would be nice if he was able to get some evidence from Yan Tae-jun's house. The pan exclaimed that it had been gathering dust for so long and hadn't been used in a very long time, so he was a bit worried. The protagonist thought that the thing's ego was higher than Everest, and that's not an easy thing to find on Earth. The frying pan talked about how it not only represented 245 dimensions, but it also knew 1.92 million recipes, and it also had a micro-vibration function installed, allowing any user to cook delicious dishes. Lee Min-jun thought, it is quite possible that Yan Tae-jun is an alien. The pan said he could see and recognize any objects within a 3-meter radius, which would help him inspect ingredients and give advice. He said not to worry about communicating, and he can also read minds. The protagonist angrily thought maybe he should just throw this pan away. He asked the frying pan if Yan Tae-jun had ever used it. The frying pan said yes, and quite often. The protagonist said he had a question about his. Pan asked if he could ask for a favor. The protagonist asked what kind of favor. Pan asked if he could drop it like he wanted to because he liked it. The protagonist's patience broke and he smiled angrily. A loud sound shook the building. Frying Pan said that Yan Tae-jun seemed to be an ordinary person, and he had thought so since their very first meeting. The protagonist, sitting on the floor, asked when he last saw him. Frying Pan said a week ago, around 2 in the morning. He said that he saw him leave in the middle of the night, and he wondered at the time what kind of meeting it was that he had blown off so late for. The next day, he sensed movement in the living room. Frying Pan calmed down and thought that nothing had happened. The protagonist opened his eyes in astonishment. He asked Chongpul if anyone had entered the house after the incident. Chongpul said, today is the first time since Yan Tae-jun left the house. Chongpul said he was sure that person was not Yan Tae-jun. He said he always just comes in, searches the house and leaves just before dawn, and he came in 5 days in a row but then just disappeared. Lee Min-jun asked if he had seen his face. Frying Pan said, unfortunately, he doesn't have night vision mode, but judging from the silhouette, it was definitely a person. The protagonist said to come and go without using the door, you need warp magic. Chongpul asked what the pan said. Turning around, he said that there was someone here who had searched the house before them, and most likely came in and out using warp magic. Minjun's eyes glowed blue, and he said that he was looking for signs of magic in the present, but should have looked in the past. Everything around him turned black and white except for the blue magic spreading through the room, and Changpul asked what he was doing. The protagonist said that there are spiritual worlds that intersect with the material world, and magic leaves traces in the spiritual world. He asked him if it was too complicated. Changpul said yes. Minjun said, now he only has to find traces of using warp magic and find out who was infiltrating the house. He asked the frying pan if this is where he entered. Frying pan said yes, and he always appeared right here. The protagonist, looking at the blue magic in the air, said to find it. He said 10 traces of warp magic, and considering he's been here 5 times, everything matches perfectly. Minjun told Changpul that he had found traces of magic. He offered to try to trace them. Changpul asked what the pan was talking about. The protagonist told the pan that he was going with them because he was the only witness. They put the frying pan, who asked if he wanted to tie him up and steal him, in the trunk. Minjun told Changpul not to touch that frying pan unnecessarily. Changpul agreed. He asked if all mages are capable of doing this. The protagonist said no, but as far as he knows, he's already experienced. Changpul said since his life is so long, even if he is only a quarter elf, he must have been using magic for a long time. He said his abilities are astounding. Minjun asked if he was going to retire in 5 years. Changpul said yes, and orcs age slowly, but it happens very suddenly. The protagonist said he doesn't know how the other orcs are doing, but he's holding up well. Turning to him, he asked if he wanted to work for them once he retired. Changpul said he knew their rules. The protagonist asked not to piss off the troll. Changpul said, different. Minjun said he needs a book with all their rules because he can't memorize it all. Smiling, Changpul said, act according to the situation. Do only if the occasion permits. He told him to forget it or his mom would throw a tantrum. The protagonist asked if she wasn't worried right now. He started to talk about what they were saying on the news when they apprehended a drunken orc officer beating up a human. But he was interrupted by a loud voice talking about a human party being organized by humans. The voice was shouting about how the land had always belonged to them. There was a truck next to their car, from the large speakers on which the voice was coming from. The voice was demanding the power back to the humans, talking about the main human party, candidate number 7 Choi Tech. The protagonist closed the car window. A heavy silence hung in their car. The protagonist suggested listening to the radio, and Changpul agreed. The voice on the radio said, to the main news, a visit from the Jelanko dimension. Princess Berm of the United Royal Family was announced. The visit is rumored to be in preparation for mass immigration. 2 orcs were walking nearby down the street and a voice on the radio said, however, the United Nations organization is currently denying this. Ghost is calling a protest today under the congressional building. The protagonist looked at the blue traces of magic in the window. A voice from the radio said that their request was valid, and Bill concluded that it would violate their privacy. Minjun told Changpul to stop here. He said the tracks diverge here. Changpul got out of the car and said this was an orc community. A few orcs nearby were playing a board game. The protagonist said if they came every night for 5 days, they must have settled here for a while, and on reflection, this neighborhood fit perfectly. He said fortunately there was no trace of invisibility magic here, and suggested checking the cameras. Minjun told Changpul that he was leaving it up to him. Changpul, rubbing his chin, said he would give it a try. The next day, an amazed voice echoed down the street. The protagonist asked about the fact that there is no CCTV in the whole neighborhood. Changpul said that he knows how it is in the orc neighborhood. Minjun realized why he had that look on his face. He said since that was the case, they would use good old-fashioned methods. Changpul looked at him questioningly, and the protagonist said, yes, the traditional method. Above the slum-like neighborhood, the sky was covered with gray clouds. Minjun, throwing away the packaging, said, to think that a 21st century mage would do the research by hand. They entered a building with a sign for the orc pub. Upon entering the bar, Changpul said hello to Lai Tessim. Lai Tessim, an orc dressed in a white shirt with a black vest and black tie, with a neatly groomed beard and hair, asked what he was doing here. He asked if he had gotten the report. Minjun asked if they knew each other. Changpul said with a smile that it was within his authority. Changpul, putting the picture on the bar, said he was only here for a couple questions. He asked if he had seen anyone suspicious around here. Changpul said he has a build like the man in this photo, is mostly active at night, and has the smell of a wizard. Lai Tessim looked at the photo thoughtfully. Walking to the back of the bar, he said since he asked, he would look for him. Lai Tessum asked them to wait here because he would be back after one call. Chongpul said if he doesn't know, no one knows. The curtain opened again. Lai Tessum said someone said he saw someone similar in the third block. He told them to go there. Minjun, whistling, thought it would be easier than he thought. They talked to an old orc dressed in a white shirt. Then several orcs sitting on boxes not far from the pillar showed them the way. Chongpul said that the orc neighborhood had poor security, so they didn't even go out at night. Looking up thoughtfully, he said since the criminal walked around here every night, it would be easy to spot him. The protagonist, looking up, called out to Chongpul. His eyes glowed blue, and he said, it looks like he found him. A trail of blue magic led to the third floor of the building in front of them. Minjun said that this was the guy who used warp magic. There were several blue magic circles in front of the door to the apartment, and he said he used a barrier, apparently for his safety. The protagonist said he didn't seem to have enough skill since he cast several at once. Raising his knife forward, he said they would deal with them one at a time. Noticing something, he raised his eyebrow, smirking. Minjun grabbed the blade of his knife and said he was savvy. He asked Chongpul to step back because he was trying to escape. Dark red magic appeared in the sky and flew across the street. The protagonist ordered to take it. A stream of dark red energy hit the door with force. The wall in front of them was broken. The protagonist with an indifferent face looked inside. In front of him stood a man dressed in nothing but his underwear, and in front of him was a magical rift in space. Turning around, he stuck his hand into the rift and asked with a smirk if he thought he could catch him. Chongpul rushed forward, and the protagonist directed streams of dark red magic forward. Chongpul turned around in amazement. The protagonist's magic had grabbed the guy's leg. Hanging in the air, the guy exclaimed in surprise. The magic enveloped him like a cocoon. Immobilized, he found himself on the floor. The protagonist said, I think so. Chongpul noticed the tattoo on the guy's chest. He asked, member of society. Minjun said, society, if he's not mistaken, is a criminal organization made up of able-bodied prisoners. Chongpul said it's a gathering place for fools. He said his phone is clean. The protagonist said there is nothing special in his room. Chongpul put his hand on the guy's shoulder and said since they confirmed that he is a member of a superpowered criminal organization, according to Article 4 under the Constitution of the Republic of Korea, as a citizen. He didn't get a chance to finish and the guy spit in his face. He said he wasn't even a human being, but trash who thought he was a human being. Chongpul's face darkened. The guy twisted his face in disgust and asked if he thought that by wearing the uniform he had become one of them. He said he was so angry he just wanted to tear him apart. Minjun said he wouldn't help him even if he said something like that. Chongpul agreed. He grabbed the guy by the throat, swinging the hammer, and the protagonist asked why he got the hammer. Chongpul asked if that wasn't his style. Minjun pulled out a knife and said he had something better. Chongpul asked, a knife? The protagonist told him to take a closer look. He cut the skin on his arm and a fly-like creature flew out of the cut. Frightened looking at the creature, the guy swore. Minjun asked, since he had already guessed everything, if he would share it with them. The guy nodded, pressing his lips together fearfully. The protagonist brought the fly up to the guy's face, and it quickly flew into his body. Minjun asked Chongpul to hand him the dictaphone. He handed him the recorder, and the guy, trembling, cried out. He clenched his teeth tensely and saliva flowed from his mouth. The protagonist pressed a button on the recorder. He began to utter some magical words. Chongpul asked what it was. The protagonist said it was a happiness bug. He said it goes directly into his opponent's brain, causing dopamine to explode, causing a surge of happiness in the body. Minjun said he had recorded the spell on a tape recorder, so now he would be able to use it for a while. The evening sun colored the city with an orange light. Water slowly dripped into the sink. The boy slowly opened his eyes. Suddenly, he screamed loudly. He asked to let him go because he couldn't stand this place and he needed to go back. Minjun said, fine. One more time then. Leaning in front of him, he asked if he wanted to go back to his happy memories. The protagonist said it was a spell to control the happiness bug. He told him to tell him everything he knew and then he would let him go. The guy shouted fearfully that he didn't know where Yan Tijun was because he just had to find the secret vault hidden in his house using magic and bring all the contents to the customer. Minjun said that he didn't see anything like a secret vault when he explored the house. He asked who his customer was. The guy, smiling nervously, said he didn't know his name. He said, I'm sure he. The protagonist looked at him grimly upon hearing the words that followed. Chongpul, grabbing him by the throat, shouted about him continuing to lie even now. The guy said it was true, and he was acting on orders from the center. Turning to the protagonist, he asked what to do now. He asked if he was going to continue, for it was too dangerous. The guy, trembling, gritted his teeth. Minjun, rubbing his chin, thought that things get more complicated if the customer is a dragon. Changpul called out to him. The protagonist, lowering his gaze, thought about dragons. They are creatures that can become creatures of the highest class in only one generation. To their credit, they are not just one or two people who disappeared because they just didn't please them in some way. They are powerful beings who rule society. They are immensely rich, have immense power, and control everything like puppets. Changpul once again called out to the protagonist, and he said that he still had questions. Several police cars were standing among the buildings of a residential area. The protagonist said if they don't want to listen to him, listen to the recording at least. He asked to follow the rules. Changpul asked if they would leave the guy in that condition. Minjun said he doesn't care about him and let him enjoy the happiness bug. He said that informing the police was indeed the right thing to do. The guy, covered by a small towel, walked with his pupils narrowed, surrounded by police officers. Changpul asked about the fact that they usually just die. The protagonist said if he got decent treatment, he had about a 50% chance of survival. Looking thoughtfully into the distance, he thought that it all depended on what the effect of the magic potion would be. A vein on the guy's forehead visibly swelled. A police car was driving down a city road. The announcer on the radio said, to the following news. For Princess Vernice's visit, a decision was made. The protagonist was looking out the window. He thought, most dragons don't bother to do something like this, and it seems to him that there are only approximately 4 culprits. However, he still didn't understand their motives. He wondered who it was. The voice from the radio said that Hessen Industries had set price limits due to the news of buying government shares, and having 15% of the market capitalization. This is a record for Hessen Industries. Minjun continued to stare thoughtfully out the window. Then he exclaimed in amazement, Hessen Industries. Changpul said it was Yan Tijun's company. Looking at Changpul, the protagonist said that it was a common occurrence for people like that. He asked if they could handle it while their boss was away. Changpul suggested, perhaps he had approved everything before he even disappeared. Folding his arms across his chest, Minjun thought for a moment. He asked if he was hungry. He offered to let him eat together. Changpul asked what it was. The protagonist said it was a ham and cheese sandwich, and he heard that Kathy made it for herself. Changpul asked if she knew how to cook. The protagonist replied that he wasn't sure. Based on the information the guy told them, the protagonist went to Tijun's house one more time to find the secret vault, but found nothing. Frying Pan is silent about it as well, so they went back to the office to discuss the way forward. The protagonist sat down on the couch, leaning back. Throwing the paper in the air, he said it was time to give up, because he'd go crazy before he could figure anything out. He said he would go to the immigration office tomorrow, but he was interrupted by Kathy's voice yelling that she had arrived. Everyone turned around and Kathy asked why Uncle Changpul was here too. Changpul asked why she was calling him that. Kathy asked if he had seen his face. Noticing the frying pan, she asked that it was here. Kathy asked if they wanted to cook something delicious without her. Minjun said if she touched that skillet, she would want to wash her hands. Turning around, Kathy asked why. The frying pan in her hand exclaimed that she was pleased to meet her. Kathy exclaimed in amazement at what she was saying. She asked if she was alive. Frying Pan said she could call her silly. Kathy almost called her that, but stopped herself. She smiled and asked if she had another name because calling her silly wasn't very normal. Pan exclaimed, Dignav Alchatiku. The main character told her not to even think about taking that frying pan for herself. Kathy asked why, and is there a problem? Minjun said no. Kathy said something was definitely going to happen and she was glad she took it with her after all. She said no wonder she wanted a drink so badly. The main character said he wasn't in the mood. Changpul said he was driving. Kathy solemnly pulled out a red bottle and said, 37-year-old Kingsley Aston, Maestro Dwarf Collection. The protagonist and Changpul got up from their seats, and Changpul suggested the protagonist buy some appetizers. Minjun said he would go with him. There were many bottles of alcohol and appetizers on the table. The protagonist was relaxedly drinking wine from a glass while sitting on the couch. Changpul, head down, asked why he was the only one she called uncle. Outside the window, night had fallen. The bottles of alcohol had been emptied. Lying on the couch, Minjun thought he felt like a corpse. Lying with his eyes closed, he wondered if he had been poisoned. The naked protagonist, sinking to the surface of the water on one knee in a dark space, thought it was just a slight hangover. As he started to walk, he wondered why he had been drinking. Minjun wondered if Crown Prince Graham had made him do it. Then he realized it was 250 years ago. Minjun wondered if he was going to do it alone because he was a necromancer with a spell on him. Then he realized that it was a long time ago, when he was weak and just starting out. Reaching out for the light, the protagonist thought now he was here. Lying on the floor, he woke up, reaching his hand up. The protagonist thought he was Minjun, and he was here on Earth. Donchil said hello to him. Minjun said, "It doesn't seem to be morning anymore." Looking out the window, he looked at a piece of paper, a letter requesting an appearance. "It's regarding the current mission. There are a couple things to correct. Please visit headquarters as soon as possible. If there are any problems, you can contact the secretary." Minjun said it was Jenkinson's request for attendance. Something must be going on, he thought. The people in suits greeted the protagonist and asked him to follow them. In front of him was a tall skyscraper that read Jenkinson's. As he approached the doors that two girls opened for him, he wondered if it was because of what they had discovered yesterday with Chongpul. He was asked to enter, and Minjun thought it was the CEO's office. A girl in a brown business suit, red blouse and glasses, with short straight blonde hair with bangs swept to the side and pointed ears, said with a smile that she was already waiting. "Blair, the general secretary of the Jenkinson Corporation. Also, Jenkinson is a dragon." Minjun was slicing potatoes with his knife with a purple blade. Kathy, who was brushing her teeth, looked at him in amazement. She asked him why didn't he get another knife. The protagonist said that this knife was the best. Kathy said she had heard that it was used as a relic for human sacrifices. Minjun, looking at her knife with a smirk, told her not to worry because he could neutralize it with his magic. Turning away, she said she understood. The protagonist suggested Chongpul to look elsewhere today. Chongpul, sitting on the couch, agreed and said he would need to make one report first. A voice from the TV announced a change to news from the entertainment industry. The elf actress, Erinda Serafi, has been chosen as the Xmez Muse and is now finishing shooting a perfume commercial. They are presenting a new fragrance with elf body odor. Chongpul blushed a little while looking at the TV screen. Kathy gathered her hair into a ponytail. She sat down on the couch, looking at her phone. Someone said he didn't even realize how great their body smelled until he tried that perfume. Turning around, Kathy asked the protagonist why there was no such scent coming from him. Minjun froze for a moment. Kathy asked if he wasn't an elf in his prime. The protagonist said that this scent wouldn't be felt if he was only a quarter elf. The Jenkinson skyscraper glistened in the light of the afternoon sun. Blair, folding her arms across her chest, told the protagonist with a smile that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Sitting down at the table, Minjun asked if something had happened. Blair, adjusting her glasses, said that the case of Chairman Taejun's disappearance that was assigned to them was of extreme interest to Chairman Jenkinson. After he was told the identity of the arrested HS member, she was assigned to contact the agent who was given the case. Turning to the protagonist, Blair asked who he thought was the dragon who had hired the member of the criminal organization. Turning on the projector, she said that they thought those three were the prime suspects. There were three people on the screen: Halispade, male, no special notes; Detravia, female, special notes, pregnant; Edelaine, female, no special notes. The protagonist thought he had. He asked why the chairman did it, and why he wanted to see him. Blair asked what he knew about Hessen Industries. Minjun asked if it is not a pharmaceutical company. Blair switched the slide on the screen and said, "For others, that may be true, however Hessen Industries, which was run by Chairman Taejun, has a secret mission." The main character said it's a business and the fact that they are doing something like that is obvious. Blair said that there was some problem in their research, and it was that they were doing dangerous research about the genetics of the dragon family. Minjun's gaze became more serious. He thought that dragons were immune to all poisons, and they were strong, so maybe they were interested in them. However, dragons are too proud to allow research to be done on them. Perhaps the one who attacked Taejun is a dragonkin embittered by research, and that dragonkin was extremely proud of his noble dragon family. Folding his hands on his chest, Minjun asked if they thought the dragon did it. He said as far as he knew, Jenkinson was always looking for attention, so he didn't think he would risk his reputation. The protagonist rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He asked why they thought Taejun was an alien. Blair said they had no proof, which was why he had suddenly disappeared. He switched the slide on the screen that said, "Disappearance of Yan Taejun, director of Hessen Industries Kim Yeonju." Blair said, and then built the company. She said his sudden success was too suspicious. Minjun thought about Taejun being an alien. He thought that the government and immigration bureau already knew about it, and they would obviously deny it. The protagonist thought that was the best scenario. Blair, reaching inside his jacket, said aside from that, the investigation will be stopped when Taejun goes missing. Holding out some object, she asked him to open it. A holographic screen appeared in front of Minjun. It said that the director of Hessen Industries, Kim Yeonju, was still doing that dangerous research. On the screen was a picture of a girl dressed in a light-colored business suit with a tie and short straight hair. Her look was extremely serious, and the protagonist said that with her power she could cover any traces. He said that she was also quite suspicious. Isn't Kim Yeonju loyal to Yan Taejun? Why would she do that? Why doesn't she reveal all the information about him? Isn't this a tempting way to make money? Blair, correcting her glasses, asked what if she wanted to get his position. The protagonist thought, is that why she decided to kill her boss? He remembered the corpse hanging from the tree. Minjun thought that it was about something else now because there were dragons involved. Getting up from his chair, he thought, the possibility of that is still there, and he should have given up on this case from the beginning. The protagonist, closing his eyes, started to talk about how he should have backed out initially, but Blair interrupted him. Holding out an envelope to him, she said if he had any doubts, he should read this letter. Glancing at the protagonist, she said that she advised him to do so right now. Minjun gloomily looked at the letter. There was a light burning in the empty hallway. Minjun placed his hand on the envelope. Lowering himself into a chair, he said he didn't stand a chance. He said he would read it. Blair folded her arms across her chest with a smile. A police car drove down the city street. Minjun and Changpul walked to the Hessen Industries building. They sat in an office with a large window, and someone asked if they were waiting. Apologizing, Kim Yeonju said that they were late. Her skin tone was a bit grayish and there were noticeable bags under her eyes. Changpul lifted up from his chair and introduced himself. The protagonist, seeing the red energy in front of him, thought that the scent seemed very familiar to him. Kim Yeonju said that she would only talk to the human police. Changpul said that he needed her to remember a few things. The main character didn't listen to their conversation, thinking about the fact that he's in such a state now that it's easy to drain all the energy out of him. Looking at Kim Yeonju with a cold gaze, he thought that this woman was saying some very strange things. Kim Yeonju, rising from her chair, suggested that we end here. Apologizing, she said that she was very tired today. The main character called out to her and said that he had heard that they had another manager missing, but they chose not to mention it for some reason. Kim Yeonju said maybe he just left and isn't in contact. Minjun told her that he has a unique ability. He asked her if she had ever heard of interspecies sex pheromone. Interspecies sex pheromone is an unexplained biological mystery. Mutants capable of spreading a pheromone that attracts other species are called interspecies sex pheromone manifestors, performing a special mission on behalf of an organization, researching the device of some special organisms that emit pheromones that attract other species that are incapable of interbreeding. 50,000 talent. The protagonist, smirking slightly, thought it would be the easiest thing to do. Kim Yeonju nervously lowered her gaze. Minjun asked since when did she have any relationship with a dragon. He said that usually the interspecies sex pheromone is only released when there is frequent contact with another species. Kim Yeonju struggled to find words. The protagonist recalled Blair's words that they were considering these three as prime suspects. Among them was a dragon that could be related to Kim Yeonju, a manifestor of the interspecies sex hormone. The protagonist asked when she started hanging around with the Edelins. The police car was parked in an underground parking lot. Minjun, sitting in the car, folded his arms across his chest and said he couldn't believe she just left. No response. Changpul said that was really weird. He asked how he figured out the dragon. The protagonist started to explain. Minjun couldn't take the noise anymore and grabbed the frying pan, cursing angrily. The frying pan apologized and said since they were heading to Hessen Industries, she had something she wanted to tell, couldn't hold back any longer. She said she thought she knew the person they were talking about. The vein on the protagonist's face swelled and he repeated the words of the frying pan questioningly. The frying pan exclaimed about it being Kim Yeonju. He asked about it knowing Kim Yeonju. The frying pan replied, of course. Minjun asked where from. Pan said that it used to visit the host's house often, until eventually it started coming every 1 to 2 weeks for sleepovers. The protagonist asked if it was joking. The orb in their car started glowing blue. Changpul said he could hear something. They looked at the blue balloon. Earlier, when Changpul was interrogating Kim Yeonju, the protagonist had secretly cast a wiretapping spell on her. A voice came from the ball, investigators. 2 investigators had just come in. Kim Yeonju on the phone shouted and asked why he didn't say anything and what he was going to do now. She asked how he still couldn't find one person. Kim Yeonju yelled into the phone about how they should at the cost of their lives find him faster than the orcs. She asked if it was a dragon if it couldn't even summon a spirit. The person on her phone called her stupid. He had a piercing in his lip and said that intimacy with spirits is a trait that dragons don't exhibit, so he does what he can. He asked if she realized how many elves were looking for Taejun. The protagonist and Changpul listened intently to their conversation, reacting upon hearing Taejun's name. Minjun thought of the recent case of missing elves. The voice from the balloon said that they blamed them for being useless, but one did turn out to be useful today. A girl in jeans and a black jacket with short blue hair said that there was an old elf with amazing powers hiding in the bookstore, and she had come to catch this interesting creature. Minjun listened tensely to their conversation. With a smirk, the girl said, and there he was. Donchul, holding several books in his hands, greeted her. He spoke of a customer coming to see them, and the girl said, hanging up the phone. The protagonist's pupils narrowed with shock. Chongpul said that they should leave. The protagonist said no. He thought if they drive 10 kilometers through traffic to Seoul, it will be too late. Minjun told Chongpul to listen to him carefully. He plunged the knife into his palm. Red magic enveloped him and he said it was warp magic. The protagonist said once he completely shifted, he would immediately head to Hassan Industries and secure Kim Yeonju. Clenching his fist, he said that he would settle some matters in the meantime. Glaring at him, Minjun told him to lock her up somewhere until he contacted him because if something went wrong, they could use her as a hostage. Chongpul asked in amazement who he was going to blackmail. The protagonist replied, who else if not the dragon? The girl entered the bookstore with her hands in the pockets of her jeans and famously said hello to the elf. Lakefield, who was reading a book, looked back at her. The girl with a crazy smile told him to summon a spirit. Lakefield closed the book and said that for a spiritualist, spirits are his alter ego and soulmate. The girl tilted her head sideways questioningly and he said that he would never summon one near someone he didn't trust. Taking out the papers, the girl told him not to say anything stupid. Placing the papers on the table, she told him to find this man as quickly as possible. Lakefield looked at her with a serious look and asked if she understood his words. The girl grinned maliciously. She called him a lowly creature and blue magic surrounded her. A bright blue light illuminated the entire store. Lakefield thought it was a roar filled with the magical power of a dragon, and it literally shook the body and mind. Donchul worriedly looked inside with tears in his eyes. He remembered the main character stroking his head and telling him that sometimes some pretty annoying customers could come in. He said he dealt with some of them, but they would always find holes in the ship. Donchul, trembling, repeated his words about using a huge explosion and a black book if those guys showed up again. He carefully pulled out the black book with his right hand. He fearfully told himself to go down the stairs that opened when he pulled out that book. The girl lifted Lakefield by the throat above the ground and asked where they would start. A bright yellow light illuminated the room, and she turned around. Lakefield looked, opening one eye, in the direction of the light. He remembered asking the main character about bringing them again. Minjun, who was putting a cactus on the shelf, asked if he could leave them there for now. The cactus was surrounded by a yellow magical barrier, and Lakefield thought about it being a barrier for special guests. A bright yellow flash flashed. A stream of yellow magic spewed out through the entrance to the store. Lakefield took Donchul to the second floor. The protagonist, smiling slightly, praised Donchul for a job well done. Donchul turned around with a pleased smile. The girl who was thrown back against the fence on the street let out a curse. Her face contorted with rage and veins swelled on her face. Rising to her feet, she said she would rip them to shreds. Above her head, red magic appeared in the sky. Minjun looked up at her, shrouded in dark red magic. Grinning, the girl asked if he was in charge here. The protagonist, standing in the sky above the rooftops of the buildings, did not answer her, and the girl asked if he was deaf. Lowering himself to the roof with his palm over his face, he said no. His face contorted with anger and he cursed menacingly, removing his palm from his face. Minjun, standing on the roof, said, Edelins, 64 years old, received temporary citizenship 6 years ago and moved to the land. He said she didn't have a chance to get official citizenship because of measurement issues. Edelin's face turned into a grin and she wondered how he knew about it. The protagonist with a sinister expression asked if she knew who he was. Looking at her with a cold stare, he said that she was acting like a frightened child, and obviously she wasn't even familiar with dragon customs. Edelin swore and kicked the ground with force, breaking the asphalt under her feet. Minjun asked if she wanted to show her real face. He said he was sure the older dragons would like a troublesome fool. Edelins lowered her gaze in amazement and passers-by looked at her in wonder. The protagonist told her to follow him because he knew a place. Above Edelin's head, a stream of red energy flew through the sky. Grinning madly, she said that she would make him regret it. The lights of the night city were hidden behind a series of high hills. Minjun's one eye was glowing red, one of his hands had taken on an inhuman hue, and he said, sitting on a rock, that the elders were clearly scaring her since she was so scared and followed him as soon as he mentioned their name. Edelins, rubbing the back of her head, grinned and said, making it seem as if he had trapped her. A flock of birds took off from one of the hills. Edelins, smiling evilly, said, now it was definitely the end of him. A bright and wide column of blue light rose into the sky. In front of the protagonist stood a huge blue dragon that opened its maw wide. The rumble of the impact rumbled through the forest. The dragon left behind a huge furrow in the ground and the debris of broken trees. Minjun, floating in the air, thought it had been a long time since his last dragon hunt. Looking at his red arm, he thought that his arm was recovering too slowly. The protagonist thought that it was not surprising because warp magic was expensive. He cut off his arm with one swing of his knife because he couldn't use it anyway. A stream of purple energy rushed through his body into the place where his arm used to be. The dragon began to flap its wings, letting out a menacing roar. The stream of purple energy began to run out. The purple energy formed a dark purple arm. The protagonist frowned and looked at her fist, thinking that she would pay for all the mess she made in his territory. The dragon was rapidly approaching him. It slammed its jaws shut with force. Finding that the hero was not to be found between them, she widened her eyes in amazement. The protagonist dodged through the air. Swinging his fist, he thought he would not spare her, even though she was a dragon. Violet energy struck the dragon's face with force. Edelins wondered how a human could move like that. Her eyes glowed brightly blue and a blue aura surrounded her. A bright blue energy was gathering in front of her mouth. Then June asked if she was crazy, using dragon breath here. It disappeared into thin air. Appearing above the dragon's head, he asked if she wanted to set the entire forest on fire. He thought of the dragon's 6 brains, thinking and magic. Only the hind brain is responsible for balance. The protagonist thought he should aim right there and cause a concussion. He struck the dragon in the back of the head with force. The dragon promptly fell to the ground. Edelins lay motionless on the ground with its mouth open. Minjun thought it had worked. Holding the knife in his hand, he thought that the outer layer covering the dragon's entire body was now weakened due to the concussion. Deciding to put a curse on her, he threw his knife downward. The knife plunged the purple blade into the dragon's scales. Edelins screamed sharply in pain. The protagonist slowly approached her. His hand terminated in a sharp purple spike. He said, "A blind spot where you can induce paralysis in the lower limbs." Minjun thrust his hand into the dragon's scales. Edelin's eyes were filled with tears and she screamed that she didn't want to die. The protagonist pulled his hand out of her body. Turning around, he said if she was stupid and weak, she didn't deserve to live. Minjun turned back, shrouded in blue light, and Edelins asked how dare he. The protagonist walked ominously towards the dragon lying on the ground. He stabbed with his knife, but someone told him not to continue. Minjun's hand stopped in place. He raised his head upwards. The protagonist thought about it being telepathy. He looked up at the full moon shining in the sky and someone told him to think hard. He said he wished he had stopped there. A guy with short blonde hair gathered back was watching Minjun through a magic screen, standing in front of the window of a tall skyscraper. The protagonist said he couldn't. He referred to the man as Chairman Jenkinson. Minjun said she was trespassing on his territory. Jenkinson said he understood that. Clutching the knife in his hand, the protagonist told him not to stop him. Jenkinson said this is a racial issue and he has no choice. He asked him not to force him to be more petty than he is now. He asked if he should bring up the Dragon Code. The main character's eyes widened at those words. The Dragon Code overrides the laws of mortals. It states that only a dragon can kill another dragon. To violate it is to declare war on all dragons. Minjun said it must be hard to be a dragon, especially one like Jenkinson. Jenkinson asked him to be honest with him because no one is bugging them. Minjun gritted his teeth. He yelled that this wouldn't have happened if he was doing his job normally. Jenkinson was silent for a while. The protagonist wondered if he should bring up the Dragon Code. Putting his foot down on the dragon, he said that it was his business and he was just dealing with whoever dared to touch what was his. Squinting his eyes tiredly, Jenkinson said, asking him, as an old friend, to listen to him. Frowning and silent for a moment, Minjun said that it wouldn't take away his anger. Jenkinson asked if they should take care of it. The protagonist said that he would just take some blood from the creature. Looking down, he said that it might shorten its life, but it was still better off dead. Minjun asked if he was okay with that option. Folding his arms across his chest, Jenkinson agreed and said he would send a team of paramedics. The man in chemical defense approached the main character, who was sitting on the dragon's tail, and said that he had done a good job. There were many people in chem protection in front of Minjun, and one of them said they would take care of the aftermath. Internal organs, lymph and skin are highly prized, but it is illegal to sell them. All the leftovers after the battle will be taken by the Bureau, leaving not a drop. Minjun thought the body parts alone would be worth a couple million, but that's all small things compared to their blood. Looking up, the protagonist opened the account information. The dialogue box announced that a longtime friend had sent 10,000 dalent to his account. Current balance, 31,523 dalent. When your balance reaches the minimum, you will be charged a fee. If payment is not made in a timely manner, you will be sentenced to death. Immediate release cost, 5,124,990. The protagonist thought he had gotten half of his entire balance for this case. Chongpul told him over the phone that he had just confirmed the transfer to his account. Minjun asked what was up with Kim Yeonju. Chongpul said that he had tied her up like he said he would. Minjun asked him to send him the address so they can get it over with already. Chongpul and the main character stood in front of Kim Yeonju sitting on a chair. She started to say something about the evidence from the phone records, but the protagonist told her not to worry about it. Holding a beetle on his finger, he said that he would get her to confess anyway. He brought the bug closer to her face. Kim Yeonju asked what he was talking about. Minjun decided to proceed. However, the confession Kim Yeonju made surprised him to say the least. After meeting Edelins, Kim Yeonju realized that she was under the influence of a pheromone. Studying her interspecies sex pheromone, Taejun began taking blood to Kim Yeonju on a regular basis. Taejun researched and determined the principle of how the blood of an interspecies sex pheromone carrier influenced the dragon's blood. In the research process, he needed as much dragon blood as he took from the interspecies sex pheromone carrier, Kim Yeonju. Remembering Edelin's face, the protagonist thought why, since they had no connection. And where was Taejun getting so much dragon blood from? The protagonist opened his eyes in astonishment. Turning around, he turned to Chongpul. Minjun asked where Taejun's other houses were, besides the one in Hanam-dong. The orange car was going fast on the road, and he thought about the multipurpose building in Handi, the condo in Jecheong, and the villa in Gachong. He also has a villa in Gangwon-do Sakcho. Minjun made a phone call while sitting in the back seat of a cab. Blair picked up the phone and said that she was now taking calls in place of the chairman. The protagonist frowned and told her to put him through to the chairman. He didn't care what he was doing and he should get in touch with him. He said it's about an illegal immigrant who shares an ancestor with him. Blair opened her eyes wide in amazement. The sea waves were on the sandy shore. A black car was driving down an empty road. The guy in the car said if he had only known that he would have to meet him like this, he would have originally gone along with him. Jenkinson got out of the car, dressed in a black coat. Fire Dragon Jenkinson, the chairman of Jenkinson's company, the senior dragon. The protagonist looked at him, putting his hands in his pockets. The two of them walked along the pier. Minjun thought why only Taejun disappeared exactly in the middle of the research and used a valuable homunculus as a fake body to commit suicide. The answer was simple, because all the research had already been completed. A man sat on the edge of the pier with a fishing rod in his hands. Taejun was pumping out liters of his own blood for research. Approaching the fisherman, the protagonist, calling him Taejun, said that he had set the whole thing up. Minjun thought of a race capable of pumping out liters of its own blood. Taejun took off his hat. Turning to them, he asked them about the fact that they weren't the customers he was expecting. The protagonist thought that this meant that Taejun was not a human but a dragon. Taejun's face was unshaven. Some time ago, it was night in Taejun's house. Kim Yeonju was lying in bed, and Taejun said that he would have to leave soon. He said that she had better start dating others. Rising up in bed, Kim Yeonju asked where he was going. Taejun, standing with his back to her, remained silent. Kim Yeonju tearfully said that they had known each other for over 10 years. She asked him to at least tell her when, where, and why he was leaving. Covering her face with her hands, she asked who she was to him. That's when she met Edelins. She kept telling herself about the fact that he himself had told her to date others. A few months into their affair, she felt strange changes in her body and decided to take a test, hoping the baby was his. Lying in bed in Taejun, Kim Yeonju said that she went to the gynecologist today and was diagnosed with interspecies sex pheromone dragon type. The detection of interspecies sex pheromone was a very unexpected result. Taejun said that he had one request then. His words were strange, as if Kim Yeonju's confession of cheating meant nothing. Taejun asked if he could take her blood. Lifting up in bed, she repeated his words questioningly. Kim Yeonju was furious. However, she ended up giving him her blood anyway. If she could continue to be with him, she was willing to give him her blood anytime. She could give him as much as he asked for. Smashing the wine bottle on the floor, Kim Yeonju shouted to shut up. She said that not only was he going to suddenly go somewhere, but he was also giving all his Hessen Industries shares to a charity. Biting her lip with tears in her eyes, Kim Yeonju asked if he had forgotten that Hessen Industries wasn't just owned by him, and she was both invested in the company. Taejun, closing his eyes, said that he couldn't say the details. She let out a shout. As she gathered her things, she wondered what she was to him, a useful colleague, a lover, or just a lab rat giving her blood. Edelins, holding a wine glass in her hand, said that this guy had clearly hurt her. She asked if she wanted revenge on him. Hugging her around the neck, Edelin said with a smirk that she would help her. Kim Yeonju accepted her offer, but she still couldn't get revenge on him. After all, Taejun had already left. The main character told Taejun that the Immigration Bureau had already searched his place. He said that he used Kim Yeonju's cross-species sex pheromone to create a virus that penetrates the dragon's immune system and causes death. Taejun said, virus. Looking forward, he said it was the only virus that could penetrate a dragon's body, an invulnerable body. Taejun said, however, the research wasn't finished yet because he didn't have much time. Minjun said even if this attempt was unsuccessful, it is still considered a crime, and a very serious one. He said that he couldn't be challenged even if he was found mentally ill. Taejun repeated his words about mentally ill, tilting his head down. He asked with a smile if they thought he was crazy. Minjun said no and asked who would create a virus that killed dragons. Taejun asked, maybe I hate dragons. He said he thought about it for a long time and came to the conclusion that dragons are pests that threaten the social ecosystem in all its layers. He said with a grim face that all the troubles are from them. The protagonist thought that there are such personalities even among humans, and there are some who claim that the earth could be saved if all humans just disappeared. But even humans don't kill each other to reduce the population. That would be insane. Taejun's face twisted in a crazy smile. Breathing out, Minjun thought that he had already lost his mind. Taejun said to think about it. After all, dragons are the pus of society. He said no matter how everyone defends themselves, the dragons will still subjugate everyone. Taejun said, the other races are like different colored paints, all will eventually blend together. But dragons are like oil, always rising above the water. Taejun said dragons suppress and dominate other races, polluting societies. He asked Jenkinson if he was wrong. Jenkinson, closing his eyes, told him that he was not interested in his inadequate thoughts. Minjun pulled his knife from behind his back and asked Taejun if he had Earth citizenship. Taking the knife by the blade, he asked if he could provide a residency permit that would allow him to legally stay on Earth. Taejun said with a smirk, none of that. Minjun spat blood from his hand and said he thought so. A huge blue barrier with 2 magic circles surrounded them. The main character called out to Jenkinson. Jenkinson, touching his tie, said that he didn't want to go to war with his species and it was pointless. Taking off his tie, he asked who he was waiting for here. Looking at the sunset at the raging sea, Taejun remained silent. Jenkinson said since he refused to answer, he had no other choice. A bright ray of light joined the raging sea in the cloud-covered sky. It rained heavily, and Taejun calmly looked up into the sky. Lightning flashed in the sky, and a huge dragon appeared over the water. Taejun, surrounded by purple light, said as expected, dragons are ferocious. In front of Minjun floating in the air was a huge dragon. He said that it had been a long time since he had fought dragons. Frowning, he added, much less with 2 in one day. Lightning flashed, and the dragons, along with the protagonist, rushed to attack. Blindingly bright lightning struck the sea surface. The announcer on the TV was broadcasting breaking news. An unidentified giant typhoon had hit the coast of Sokcho, affecting the entire country. Kim Yeonju looked out the window while sitting on the floor. The Korea Meteorological Service is currently investigating the causes of the typhoon. It is strongly advised that residents living around Sokcho familiarize themselves with the disaster evacuation plan and refrain from walking. Looking out the window, Kim Yeonju said in a weak voice, Taejun. Lights were burning in the windows of the room with the signboard of Troll Yoga Studio. The girl was warming up alone in the room, sitting in front of a mirror. Chongmin, 42, is a troll yoga instructor. Hearing a rumbling sound, she opened her eyes wide. Chongmin glanced out the window. A crow had crashed into the glass, leaving cracks on it. The window was covered in cracks, and she wondered what was going on here. She nestled against the window in shock. Tornadoes and lightning were raging over the sea nearby. A torrential downpour was raining down on the raging sea. The waves were on the rocks from which fell into the water. The main character was floating in the air. Both of his arms were cut off. The red dragon told him that he was stronger than he looked. The dragon flew in the air above them, and he said that he was indeed worthy to be called the Elder Dragon. Minjun began to grow a new arm. Jenkinson said he couldn't fall flat on his face. A bright light came from his mouth, and he said he would show him the power of a true Elder Dragon. His energy flashed brightly. A stream of flames rushed forward from his mouth. In front of the other dragon's mouth, purple electric energy was gathering. The dragons shot their magic at each other. A bright flash flashed as their fire and electricity collided. Minjun clenched his red hand into a fist. Throwing himself forward, he swung his knife. Taejun said in astonishment. Yeonju. The protagonist cut the dragon into pieces with his knife. The sky cleared up. Rain dripped on the white flowers. The protagonist thought that this is the place where a person spends his last strength before death. Minjun sat at the bus stop next to Taejun. The protagonist looked at his palm. Taejun asked him if he was in his own body. Minjun said that he was indeed not in his body. Taejun looked at him and said that he would then decide what to do with the information he was about to tell him. The rain pounded on the roof of the bus stop. Taejun said that the last time the will was in the private safe of the Changchun main bank. The bus pulled up to the bus stop. Taejun, getting on the bus, said that he really hoped he would still familiarize himself with it. The protagonist asked him to say one more thing before he left. He asked who helped him with his plan. Taejun said that he didn't know them, and he just accepted help from them so that his virus could spread without getting to the periphery. The bus drove off, leaving the protagonist behind. Minjun stared after the bus, putting his hands in his pants pockets. The dragon's corpse lay in the sea, staining the water purple. The afternoon sun was shining over the city. Minjun entered a flower store. He asked the saleswoman how much the plants cost. The radio announcer said that the unusual storm that had hit the entire Sokcho coast last week was justified by the government as a natural anomaly. The saleswoman asked who could believe that nonsense, and it couldn't be a natural anomaly. Minjun lowered his gaze and thought, as expected, he still couldn't hide the consequences of this battle. He thought about the fact that Taejun had revealed one secret to him before he died. He had infected the homunculus body that was disguised as a corpse with the virus. The magic works when it comes in contact with temperatures from 500 degrees. Minjun came out of the flower store. If the corpse was cremated, the virus should have started to multiply and then mixed with the dust and spread everywhere. But that won't happen. Minjun carried the corpse to the immigration office. Looking out the car window, he thought they would study the virus as they examined the body. A dim light was visible in the window of the building. The protagonist was sitting at a computer typing something on the keyboard. On the screen was Taejun's report. Even before he took the body to the bureau, a hunch flashed through Minjun's mind that perhaps he should leave the body behind. He looked at the vial of red liquid in his hand. Although he rarely relied on his gut, 800 years of experience told him that he should act against his gut right now. Minjun thought that this virus only affected dragons. He thought how it could be of use to him. He remembered Taejun telling him that the human scent gave him away. Closing his eyes, he asked if Kim Yeonju was okay. The protagonist replied, more or less. Lowering his gaze, Taejun said that she was always anxious. He said that she was always afraid of being alone, and maybe that's why he confused jealousy with manipulation. Taejun put his palm in the rain and said she stabbed his back 3 times. The first time when she admitted to cheating on him with a dragon for months on end. The second time when she used drugs on him, treating him like a lab rat. The third time when she called him greedy for other people's goods. Minjun glared at him, and Taejun said that one time she almost kidnapped him along with that dragon. Smirking bitterly, he said, looks like he's a terrible man since she wanted to kill him 3 times. Typing on the keyboard, Minjun decided to summarize the results. Taejun intends to donate his share of Hessen Industries stock to a charity. The heir to all his assets, including accounts, mutual funds, artwork, jewelry, patents, real estate, and more, is a human woman who kept in touch with him until his death. Minjun said he was in fool. Leaning back in his chair, he said he's pathetic if he can't express his feelings because nothing will matter when he dies. Kim Yeonju stood on the seashore with the evening sun shining over it. She held a piece of paper in her hand with a trembling hand. Taejun's hat was in the water, and she thought he had left it behind. Kim Yeonju leaned over to the hat. Clutching the hat to her chest, she thought, even though he hated him and tried to kill him, she never stopped loving him. Tears came from her eyes and she clutched his hat to her even tighter. Looking out at the evening sunshine, she thought of her boss. On the table lay several Hwadu cards. Minjun, folding his arms across his chest, said that he was rather unlucky. Divination on Hwadu cards. Weather forecast. It will be too hot without rain. Beware of sudden storms. Relationship fortune-telling result. There is a possibility of reunion with a person you have not seen for a long time. The voice from the TV went to the news. The International Federation of Alchemists agreed to increase the sale of gold to 10 tons per day, resulting in a 7% drop in the price of gold. Next, the weatherman would talk about the weather and natural disasters. A woman with dark hair pulled back appeared on the screen and introduced herself, saying that it would rain lightly across the country from the afternoon. Pointing to a map, she said the magnitude 2.6 earthquake would pass through the neighborhood of Kensan-Pukto, and those who are weather-dependent should prepare themselves. Looking at the map that promised drought, Minjun gritted his teeth and said it would rain. He said the health forecast could also be wrong. Shuffling the cards on the table, the protagonist thought that before he came to Earth, he had predicted the future using divine power from another star where it is used for research. So things might be a little different here. Minjun looked at the stack of cards, the result of a relationship divination. There is a possibility of reuniting with someone you haven't seen in a long time. A red car was speeding down the road at high speed. It was a convertible driven by Kathy with the main character in the passenger seat. The car came to a stop. Kathy said with a smile that they had arrived. The protagonist was feeling nauseous. As he got out of the car, he asked if she could drive slower. Kathy told him to get a license to drive if he was not comfortable with something. Turning around, she asked about what their shopping plans were today. They walked up to a large commercial building that had a large poster advertising an elf-scented perfume. Which corporation? Eastern Branch. They walked inside, where there were many girls standing behind the shop windows. In front of them stood two girls with green hair wearing dark business suits. One of the girls greeted the protagonist and said that they were expecting his visit. She said that the goods he ordered were waiting for him. A delighted exclamation came from the VIP room. Kathy pressed her face against the glass and said, from top-grade stones to fossilized mold enzymes and dried brain mucus and even snail nymph secretions and fairy tree sap. She asked if these weren't powerful magical catalysts to support spells. Turning around, she asked the protagonist if there were any other things like that besides what he already wanted to buy. Minjun said that he was thinking of something more conventional. He thought about how Kathy probably couldn't even imagine something like this. He was thinking about how much fresh dragon blood he would need to overpower the Edelins. The girl said that she would help them with the payment of 3 billion won. The protagonist said that he would like to entrust them with the processing of some items. The girl said the process would take about an hour. She asked if he would like to wait in the lounge area. Minjun said he would like to look around. He walked down a marble hallway. A man in a blue suit with dark blue skin happily noticed Minjun. The protagonist thought to himself that he felt like he had seen him somewhere before, but couldn't remember where. He asked who the man was. The man said that he was Chon Namju. Thinking back, Minjun pointed his finger at him and said he was Taejun's lawyer. He thought about the fact that because of Taejun's will, this lawyer had helped him write those reports. Namju handed him his card and apologized, saying that he couldn't give him enough time because of his jammed schedule. He offered to talk a bit since fate had brought them together. They sat down at a small table and Namju asked if he was an immigration bureau agent. The protagonist said yes. Namju asked if he did private orders. Minjun raised his eyebrows and apologized and said that unless it was some special case, he would have to turn him down. Namju apologized and said that there was a problem, but not with him, but with his client. Minjun apologized, and Namju said it's nothing. Getting up from his seat, he said he had another case on the 3rd floor, so he would go. Handing him a business card, he told him to contact him if he changed his mind. The protagonist looked at it after him. Looking at the business card, he wondered if this was what his divination said. Getting up from his seat, Minjun thought maybe this wasn't it, and he had only met this troll a few days ago. The girl holding the diplomat noticed with a smile that he had returned. The protagonist, taking the briefcase in his hand, motioned for Kathy to return. Kathy looked worriedly at the briefcase in his hand. The protagonist clutched the handle of the diplomat tightly. Kathy called out to Minjun. She asked if he had committed any crimes or engaged in identity laundering before. Minjun silently looked away. Looking at Kathy, he asked with a smile if he looked like such a person. Kathy said that she had considered both of those options, but she had two more. Either he had lived a completely innocent life, or he had never been involved in any serious incidents. She said she thought he was quite ordinary. The man thought she had pretty good intuition. The dialogue box says, place of employment, Earth. Employment type, employment based on forced labor upbringing. Selective removal of memories was used on the subject. Kathy, putting her hand on her chest, asked the protagonist if he could tell her something. Minjun asked, what? Kathy, frowning, pressed her lips together. She asked loudly if he was a woman. Minjun asked what she was talking about. Kathy said he was just hiding a lot of things. Clutching her head, she asked for an answer as to whether he really wasn't a woman. Striking a dramatic pose, she said if he really did change his gender, then that's crossing the line. The protagonist irritably asked what she was talking about. Several people in black suits entered the building. A long red carpet covered the floor. The men lined up with their backs to the red carpet, and one of them said that the Alpha and Delta teams were on standby. Touching the headset in his ear, he said the chairman would be here soon. The protagonist wondered which chairman we were talking about. An elderly man with a cane appeared on the carpeted walkway, surrounded by men in black suits. The girls with green hair bowed and greeted the chairman. Minjun looked at them with an indifferent look. The chairman raised his head upwards. Noticing something, he opened his eyes wide. The chairman, dropping his cane, ran sharply towards the protagonist. Minjun asked what was going on. The chairman stumbled and fell face first into the floor. The men in black suits exclaimed worriedly. One of the different ones angrily asked Minjun what right he had to do this to the chairman. The chairman, struggling to rise to his feet, stopped them. Kneeling down, he asked if Minjun was Minjun. Minjun said yes. The chairman, smiling broadly, said, "Sis." Kathy, bulging her eyes, shouted that she knew it. The people around them watched in amazement. Blair said irritably that she had asked them not to call her when she was at work. The little girl floated in the air. Larissa Andreva, head of real estate security at the Jenkinson Company. She looked away tiredly. Race, ferry. Larissa sat down on her desk, putting her foot on her leg. She put the tube in her mouth and inhaled. Blair, folding her arms across her chest, asked why she had come so suddenly. Larissa blew bubbles from the tube. She said she had found someone's footprints, and someone had broken into the B-39 vault on Buckhan Mountain. Blair opened her eyes wide. She asked loudly, grabbing Larissa in her fist, what kind of fools would trespass into an elder dragon's territory? Larissa said, apparently they are very confident, so it's quite dangerous. She said, if they did it while the chairman is absent from Earth, they'll definitely start acting up soon. Blair, correcting her glasses, said that she would report this to the chairman. She told her to increase security near the vault. Larissa said she didn't think it would be enough. Blair, frowning, said they had someone they could call for help. An image of the main character appeared in her mind. Kathy, thrown into shock, asked why he had called him sister. The chairman, apologizing, said that he was used to calling the teacher that. He said the guys used to call each other sis all the time about 30 or 40 years ago. Minjun said they have not seen each other for a long time, calling him teacher Mansik. He asked how he was doing. Mansik, grinning, said he remembered him after all. He said he was running a small alchemy store. Mansik asked with a smile if he was still studying magic. The protagonist said that he gave up teaching and now just works at the immigration office. Mansik exclaimed in amazement. The woman helped him to his feet, and he said that he couldn't believe that Minjun's teacher had now become an agent, and a man who wouldn't hurt a fly was doing such a cruel job. The woman turned to the main character. She asked if he was an agent from the bureau and if he takes private orders or only from legal entities. Mansik asked his daughter what she was saying. She tried to say something but he stopped her. Mansik said that he seemed to have some unfinished business on the 3rd floor. He and his daughter left. Turning around, Mansik called out to Minjun. He said with a smile that he was glad to talk to him. He will suggest him to have tea together someday. Minjun and Kathy drove around town in a red convertible. Kathy said, the first modern Korean educational institution Gosung School. She asked if they worked like that together with Mansik. The main character said yes. Kathy said he worked as a teacher during the day and secretly caught illegal immigrants at night, and whole books could be written about him. Minjun said he is sure the government doesn't want to remember this hero's past. Kathy asked if that's why he doesn't like to talk about his past, since it's a past that the government itself doesn't want to bring up. Minjun told her to keep her eyes on the road. Kathy said cheerfully, a hero who laid the groundwork in Korea's capable kids and protected the earth from dangerous criminals. She said, he's not that simple. The protagonist thought about, there is one truth that neither Kathy nor anyone else knows. The earth has already been taken over. Some people say that the darkness that has consumed the earth came about because of the dragons. But the ones who actually control the earth, controlling these dragons like chess pieces, are the committee. It's a secret organization controlling this planet from behind the scenes. October 24, 1945, the creation of the United Nations. This day was the first time humans and aliens made contact. The main character said that the committee waited a long time to create the UN for Earthlings. The committee approached the leaders of Earth to accept a huge number of aliens from other dimensions. To accept such a large number of immigrants, they reconfigured the Mana concentration on Earth. Kathy said with a smile that she had read about it in a book once. She said thanks to the reconfiguration of Mana concentration, very capable individuals began to be born among the people, and by using magic and controlling the Daka, they were able to advance the earth, or something. Minjun, folding his arms across his chest, repeated thoughtfully, advance. He thought, they must have omitted the bad parts in the books. The car stopped, and Kathy said they had arrived. They got out of the car, and Donchil and Lakefield were in front of them, sitting in a wheelchair. The first target of the group immigration was the elves. Humans invited elves for their looks and knowledge of magic. But the path they traveled to Earth was used for more than just their intended purpose. Criminals from other dimensions began to use this distant planet Earth as a safe haven, or simply thought it was a new gold mine, and began to come here. The protagonist turned to Kathy and said that she could call it a day. He asked if she had any business left at the office. Kathy said that she wanted to listen to more of his stories over tea. Minjun told her to grab a cup and go. Holding a saucer and a cup of tea, Kathy asked if he really wasn't going to tell her anything else. Minjun said no. He told her to finish her drink quickly and leave. A knock on the door sounded. The main character turned around and asked who it was since he wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door. Minjun thought, so this is what the card said. A guy with a slight smile stood in front of him, and Minjun thought it seemed like he hadn't seen him in 100 years. The guy, dressed in a brown jacket, said with a smile that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Earth Dimension Agent, American Branch, Bradley. There were 3 teacups on the table. Kathy introduced herself and asked the reason for his visit. Minjun said he had worked with him once. Bradley said he was very stale. Pointing a thumb at himself, he asked with a smile, without saying anything else, if he could call him Bradley for once in his life. He asked if that girl had called him. The protagonist asked, which girl? Bradley asked in amazement if she had never once contacted him. He said that there was no such thing, that she had never called him once. Minjun asked who he was even talking about. Bradley said that he was talking about Dell. The protagonist froze in place. Biting his lip, he asked why she would do that. Kathy asked him if something was wrong. She asked who it was. The protagonist lowered his gaze and said that she used to be his wife. He remembered how she looked at him and they were both covered in blood. The night signs glowed brightly under the starry sky. The protagonist and Bradley asked for a double gin and tonic. A tree branch grabbed the bottle. The tree began pouring the drink into a glass. Bradley, laughing, said the tree bartender was interesting. Raising a toast, he began to drink from his glass. Choking on it, he exclaimed about his throat burning. Minjun asked with a slight smile if it reminded him of the old days and the previous dimension where they had worked together. Bradley, agreeing with him, said that all the alcohol there was like that, and it was so strong that it was impossible to tell the difference between real alcohol and fake alcohol. Minjun snapped his fingers and said since he had already had a drink, he could start. A blue magic soundproof barrier surrounded them. The protagonist asked what an agent from the US was doing in Korea. He asked in amazement about the fact that he was escorting the princess. Bradley said with a smile that it was Princess Vermi from the Jelenko dimension. Minjun thought about it being talked about on the radio a couple days ago. He remembered the radio saying, "Today it was announced that Princess Vermi will honor our dimension with her presence, and the first country where she will stop will be Korea." Minjun asked why the U.S. Bureau was involved in escorting the Jelenko diplomatic party coming to Korea. Bradley said they must be worried that their Jelenko guards won't be able to handle it, and rumor has it that they've asked the Earth Immigration Bureau for help. He said, so the reason why the Korean government asked the US for help is because the number of escorts requested was so huge that there was not enough for the entire Korean branch. Looking at the protagonist, Bradley said that there was still a rumor that it was to pave the way for the 8th group to immigrate. Minjun asked about only 40 years since the past group. He said that Princess Vermi's race is about 3.5 meters tall on average. The protagonist scratched the back of his head and said that the immigration of Group 8 probably won't happen, since they're even taller than trolls. Bradley shrugged and said, even if you take into account the height of Earth buildings, it would still be hard to accomplish. So there are rumors that the committee is preparing hard. He asked if that was interesting. Minjun said he would be more interested in hearing a little different. He said, about that girl, Dell. Bradley said he didn't know the details well, but when they completed the mission in the previous dimension, he and Minjun were sent to Earth, but Dell alone was sent somewhere else. Leaning back in his chair, he said that if memory serves him correctly, her payoff amount was about 500,000 talent, and he had no idea how she got that much. Bradley said that all he knows is that they split up with her in a dimension and she was released a couple days ago, and since she paid it all off and got out, he thought she would be trying to find Minjun. The main character exclaimed in shock that she was released. He said that the fact that she had already given 500,000 talent could not be true. Bradley said that is just his guess, but maybe she achieved a high there and got out on parole. Minjun asked what heights. He asked, like Talesia. Bradley looked at him silently. The protagonist asked about whether that meant Dell had already gotten his memories back. Bradley, putting a hand on his shoulder, asked if he was worried because she was his ex-wife. Smiling, he said that he liked her so much that he married her right away. The The protagonist asked how he could have known this would happen, since she was normal for the first 80 years. Exhaling heavily and leaning back in his chair, he said that she loved so much that she wanted to kill, saying only that it was the only way to get free. The prisoner is the property of the committee. The act of damaging the committee's property is punishable under the Property Protection Act. Minjun said if she had killed a prisoner like him or herself, she would have added property damage to her charge and she would have been sentenced to execution of the soul. He said Dell, who believed in the rebirth of souls, clearly would not have wanted that outcome. Bradley said that the first thing she should do then would be to get rid of her status as a prisoner before she tried to kill him and then go back to prison. Minjun said that he would never forget what she said to him when they broke up in the past dimension. Dell with a smile told him to wait for her because she would come to him soon. Minjun fell face down on the bar, and Bradley offered to think logically. He said she could have died the way Talija had died. An awkward silence hung in the bar. The main character got up from his seat and suggested that they go home because it was getting late. The sign for the bar said Tree Bar. Bradley and Minjun were walking down a dark alley, and Bradley said, speaking of Talija, scratching the back of his head, he said he meant to say that he definitely wouldn't end up like her. Minjun thanked him with a smile and said they would see each other later. He left through the alleys with signs. The protagonist thought about Bradley's words about how he would definitely not end up like her. The Republic, which covers an area of 36 planets and 145 space stations, Ashtal. This place has long been ruled by a dictator, a man who instilled nothing but fear. He trampled and killed anyone who disobeyed him. To take even the most famous case, tragedy struck on the industrial planet XE21, which was under his rule. When the dictator learned of the hostility towards the government, he stopped the food trade to planet XE21, which was 99% dependent on food imports. People starving to death began eating each other, and a hell began in which people hunted others like them for survival. And when the events on planet XE21 became known to others, people from all over the Republic could take no more and staged a coup d'etat. The man crawled on his knees to the control panel, leaving a trail of blood behind him. He asked if they thought he would die alone today. Cornered after the coup, he pushed the button, and that's when over 90% of all the Republic's power plants exploded and scattered ashes across the galaxy. The highly advanced Ashtal civilization was suddenly reduced to a primitive state, whereas the citizens who had finally escaped from the oppression of the cruel ruler could not escape the suffering of destruction and war. A small, gaunt child asked his mother if there was anything to eat. His mother said there was nothing else left. He told her to look. The woman looked up. While the inhabitants of that planet were dying of despair, the committee sent a group of prisoners to rebuild the destroyed dimension. These prisoners rebuilt Ashtal in 300 years. The protagonist joined the reconstruction near the end and met Dell there. The prisoner, who made a lot of progress during the rebuilding of Ashtal, was the mother of Ashtal's citizens. The girl with blue hair looked down with a smirk. Prisoner name, Talija. Dispatching agency, Spatial Intelligence Resettlement Committee. Place of employment, Ashtal. Payoff, 1,200,000 dalent. A gaunt man strode forward with a cleaver in his hand. An equally skinny girl lay on the ground with no strength. The man apologized to his daughter and said there was nothing to be done and they had no other choice. She looked at him with tired eyes. Raising up his cleaver, the man said that they had nothing to eat, so they didn't need extra mouths to feed. With tears in his eyes, he said that she could blame her stupid father even after death. Blood spattered. Talija stood in the rain with terror in her eyes. This place is Earth. She looked at the man who had just killed his daughter. In the early stages of dislocation, people killed each other just so they could have lunch. Talija's face creased in horror and disgust. Talija sank into chaos and despair. What would she do in a place like this? She couldn't see how she could help all these people. But in the bitterness a great hope was found. When gaunt children happily stuffed their cheeks with the food she gave them, or when a cured beggar kissed her hands while tears of gratitude ran down her cheeks, and even the moment when they rescued a family who had been captured by bandits and those desperately shouted each other's names. For that, they give Talija eternal gratitude. Talija stood on a high balcony above the crowd of people thanking her. In return, Talija loved them with all her heart. It was night in the city. The main character sat on a couch, holding a tin can in his hands. He rested his head tiredly on the back of the couch. Remembering Bradley's words about Talija again, Minjun opened his eyes. She wasn't just a warrior or an outstanding engineer. Her abilities lay in exceptional administrative skill and politics. She had commandeered control by committee, gaining more resources and personnel from the central region. Talija quickly rebuilt Ashtal's economy. Not only that, but the barrier that protected the planets from alien brigands was destroyed due to the dictator's explosion. A multitude of insect-like monsters floated through space, surrounding the planet. People in black robes fought the huge monsters. Talija also demonstrated her superior mercenary skills with the help of the prisoners. When she took on Del, who was trying to oust those who had broken into Ashtal and tried to completely destroy them to protect the refugee evacuation line, then he doubted her. Minjun thought Talija's management abilities were more amazing than anyone else's. Treating every citizen like a family member made a lasting impression on many, and everyone truly respected and loved her for it. 300 years ago, Talija, wiping away tears, thanked everyone. Thanks to her contributions to Ashtal, she was the recipient of a special amnesty. As a special amnesty holder, she was immediately released regardless of the remaining payoff amount. The girl said it was the first time she had seen someone actually get such a status. Someone else said he hoped she wouldn't forget them. Talija said with a smile that she would never forget them. Looking out the window, she said even if she leaves Ashtal, she will definitely come back because she would like to live here. Standing on the edge of the building, she said she had to go. Shrouded in a bright light, she began to fall downward. In the first stage of liberation, a person regains their memory. Talija sat on the edge of the building. The protagonist hesitantly called out to her. Talija was shivering and sweating profusely. She looked at her shaking hands, which were covered in blood. Fearfully raising her head, she said no. The city in her eyes was colored scarlet. Her face twisted in horror, and she screamed. Minjun, calling out to her, asked if she was all right. He asked what had happened. Walking up to her, he asked if something was wrong. Talija, with a frantic and frightened face, repeated her apology with tears in her eyes. Turning around, she yelled at him to get behind him and stay away from her. Talija screamed hysterically, demanding to be allowed to leave. She ran in the opposite direction, demanding to be let out. The committee complied with her request. Talija left Ashtal in a hurry without looking back. A few days later, Talija committed suicide. Although the committee never told them exactly what kind of memories had overtaken Talija, or what crime she had committed and why she had become a criminal, everyone had some idea of what it might have been. Minjun remembered Talija's smile. He looked sadly into empty space. The protagonist remembered Bradley telling him that he would never end up like Talija. Exhaling, he got up from the couch. Minjun thought about the fact that Talija's payoff amount was 1.2 million dalant. Current account balance, 31,523 dalant. The payoff amount is 5,124,990 dalant. Looking out the window, the protagonist in his thoughts told Bradley not to worry because no matter how horrible his memories were, he would not repeat Talija's fate. He thought he was promising that. The spaceship flew past the planet. Del said, waiting. She said with a smile that it wouldn't take long. The news anchor on TV said that gold prices have dropped 20% in the last year. Princess Verme's visit is expected to result in mass immigration of the Sultan tribe. This seems to be because the Sultan are in the business of producing gold by biogenic synthesis, which is known for its high quality. The guy with glasses looking at the phone screen exhaled and asked, immigrants again. He said there would be no normal people left soon. There were people of different races standing around him, and the guy thought there were only immigrants everywhere. Fixing his glasses, he said out loud that he was sick of it. Noticing something, the crowd shouted out that it was a Puck Hansen. The guy turned around and opened his eyes in amazement. From behind the mountain, something that looked like multicolored smoke was visible in the sky. He wondered what it was. Blair and Larissa stood in the study, heads bowed fearfully. Jenkinson, beginning to put a hand over his face, asked if they had lost everything in the B-39 treasure room at Puck Hansen. Gritting his teeth, he said that the culprit hadn't, and it was untraceable even with the help of the fairies. He asked if it was for sure. With a shudder, Blair said yes. The paper in Jenkinson's hand burned with a blue flame. Standing up from his seat, he asked if they understood why he had personally come to the committee headquarters and had been puzzling over all of this for days. Speaking through the magic screen, Jenkinson said it was because of the materials stored in that warehouse. Fixing his collar with a fearful expression on his face, he said that they had lost them. He asked Larissa if she knew how much money he was spending on her. Larissa asked how much. Jenkinson said 10 billion, and he hadn't considered it a waste until that moment. He said she believed she could brag about her knowledge of perfume research. Jenkinson said it was very hard for him to hold back from disregarding the doctor's advice. Larissa asked what he meant by that. Jenkinson said that the doctor had advised him to refrain from drinking squirrel to live longer, and it had been a long time since he'd heard those words. Larissa shuddered fearfully, and he said that if you were to start eating meat again, fairy as a first course would come in handy. Larissa fell to the floor and tearfully said it wouldn't happen again. Jenkinson turned to Blair. He said that elves didn't trust creatures beyond the line they had drawn themselves, but he still hoped she was above her kin. Jenkinson said that even in such a situation he would not mess with him in elven ways, even if he was his most useful ally. He said if she couldn't jump above the head of her race, there was no point in leaving her behind. Blair opened her eyes wide. She swallowed nervously. Jenkinson said he may not know the motives of the perpetrators, but one thing is certain, and that is they are all trying to leave Earth as soon as possible. He said, so he would inform the committee immediately so they would close all space exits on Earth. Turning away, he told Blair to contact him and tell him that he would agree to any terms. Jenkinson told her to note this to herself, and as soon as they finished their dialogue, to contact him immediately. Blair obeyed. The magic screen disappeared, and Jenkinson exhaled tiredly. He said he didn't want to burden it any further. The protagonist played Go. Putting a playing chip on the board, he asked about traffic control. He asked who came up with such nonsense. Chongpul, making his move, said that they were out of luck. The protagonist, looking at the game board, asked even if Princess Vermi is strong, why control all of Seoul? He said that they were hiding the details of the princess movements so that it would be hard to track her. Chongpul asked him what he was looking at. He told him to be quick because he was only stalling for time. Minjun sat down on the couch and irritably asked if he was going to play all day, and if he was going to catch a criminal. He asked when he learned to play so well. Chongpul said at his age he had had plenty of time to learn. He asked if he had finished his beer. Holding a bandnote in his hand, he said he would go get himself another and take him one too. Noticing the smoke, Chongpul looked into the kitchen. Kathy was frying something with a concentrated look, and her pan was emitting smoke. Chongpul looked at her in astonished silence. The contents of the pan looked horrible. A nervous sweat ran down Chongpul's face. The contents of the frying pan were smoking heavily. Chongpul fearfully opened his mouth. Turning to the protagonist, he said, "Let Kathy keep it because there was no way to clean it up anyway." Minjun said, looking at that pan, Kathy remembered all her wifely duties, but didn't remember that she was very bad at them. The protagonist pulled out a box of chess and said with a smile that it was time for the legend. Taking out his phone, he irritably asked who was calling him at such a crucial time. Minjun amazedly asked what she needed at such a time. Chongpul asked who it was. The protagonist said it was a troublemaking elf who was in trouble again. The sky over the mountains was covered in clouds. Larissa, Blair, and Minjun stood in front of the huge warehouse doors. Larissa said that unfortunately she couldn't see anything herself. Blair said, as expected. The main character looked at Larissa and said that even a fairy who can communicate directly with the spirit world is unable to find clues. Larissa asked if they had no way out at all. Minjun turned to Blair and asked if they had tried anything else besides talking to the spirits. Blair said it hadn't been that long since the fire had been put out, so she hadn't had much time to do anything. But she had summoned one person with psychometric powers, but that hadn't helped either. Minjun said that residual thoughts can be easily erased with magic, especially with such large-scale spells. Blair said that she was trying to get in touch with the spirit world because they even called in psychokineticists, but even they didn't figure anything out. The main character said that looking at that protective barrier, it seems that the spirits couldn't even come close to this place, and even if they were here, they would have been swept away by that spell. He remembered the report on TV that said that the forest fire in Puckhansen wasn't real. Minjun thought that it had raged for 6 hours last night. He thought maybe it was another argument between the Jenkinson family, but it turned out to be a ritual to create a powerful spell. Touching the door, the protagonist thought the spell was so powerful that it not only destroyed the barrier, but consumed everything material and spiritual as if nothing had ever happened. Larissa, raising her index finger, suggested that they turn to the druids. She assumed they had seen something, since they were connected to the mountain animals. Minjun said that in situations like this, all surviving animals run as far away as possible, and they wouldn't come even if you called them. He had an idea and looked at the door. Taking out a knife from behind his back, the protagonist thought that the surviving animals had run away, and there were none left in the neighborhood, but there were animals that were already dead. He ran the knife blade across his palm. A huge stream of red energy burst into the air from his hand. Blair, covering himself with his hand from the strong wind, asked what it was. A ghostly hoof stepped on the ground. A ghostly deer shrouded in red magic stood in front of the protagonist. Blair asked in astonishment what it was. Minjun frowned and thought that it was a spirit to whom souls who died in suffering had transferred their pain and resentment. Even if magic was involved here, sweeping away the remnants of thoughts and even souls in its path, they would always remember the moment of their death. They would never forget it. Several men in white robes stood near the entrance to the warehouse. One of them asked if everything was ready. Another said yes, and the last stop was complete. Another said the preparations were finally complete to drive the aliens from Earth. A deer standing among the trees in the forest looked in their direction. A circle appeared above the man's hand with magic, and he announced the beginning. Raising his hand upward, he shouted, "For the peace of all men." Multicolored flames surrounded them. The evening sun shone on the tattoo shop. The voice in the headphones of a guy with glasses and blue hair said that he missed the time when only the human race was called humans. The orc the guy was tattooing shouted at him to be careful. The voice in his headphones was saying that everyone was getting sick of him with their tolerance. He asked who would fight for their human rights. The orc put the money on the table. As he left, the orc said that he was still in pain and had just come for a unique sketch. Turning around, he waved his fist in the air and said if he got an infection, he would be responsible. The guy with the slippery smile told him not to drink, not to smoke, not to go to the sauna for a week and to apply the ointment he gave him. Do Yonsok, human tattoo master. Swearing, the orc opened the door with his foot. The voice in the guy's headphones said that human rights should exist as a word for humans only. The smile disappeared from his face and he said, "Filthy animal." The orc walked out into the evening city street. Police cars were parked next to a few stores. Several goblins were on their knees, tearfully apologizing. A policeman angrily shouted at a goblin to get up and walk to the bus. The goblin continued to apologize. The policeman, cursing, swung his baton. Chongpul, putting a hand on his shoulder, asked him what he was doing. The guy said he had misunderstood him, and he had heard that goblins were like little children, but to do so. Chongpul interrupted him and exhaled heavily. Dropping to one knee, he told him not to say anything like that again. After all, he was a police officer. Reaching out his hand to the goblins, he told them that it really wasn't that scary, and they could take the bus to the campground, which had free food. Taking the goblin's hand, Chongpul told them to return afterward. Smoke came out of the exhaust turbine of the bus and the driver, after making sure everyone was seated, said they were off. Chongpul, looking after the bus, said even if it was because of Princess Vermi, yesterday they regulated all the traffic from the terminal to the hotel, and now they are patrolling even the outskirts, and more every day. Suddenly, his phone rang. Looking at the screen of the phone, Chongpul saw that it was Minjun. He picked up the phone and the latter asked if he was busy. Chongpul said if he just wanted to chat, then no. The protagonist asked if he remembered the day they came to the orc neighborhood and caught that criminal. Chongpul said yes. Minjun said that among all the offenders, there was one with a tattoo. He asked what his name was. Chongpul said his name was Kim Yushin. He asked what was wrong with him. The main character sitting at the table said that he wasn't talking about him right now, but about his tattoo. He asked if he could ask him where he got those tattoos. Chongpul agreed and asked what was wrong with his tattoo. Minjun said it was an inscription in an ancient language, which translated means orcs only waste oxygen. These words made Chongpul's face immediately darken. Tattoo shop. Yonsok leaned back on the back of the couch and said that today was an important day. He asked if he could close the shop early. He repeated, "Big day." He locked the doors of his tattoo parlor with a padlock and chain. Yonsok exclaimed about the crows scattering all his trash again. With a wave of his foot, he scared the bird away and asked why they were still here. Swearing, Yonsok said they had ruined his mood. He put on his headphones, the voice in which said that immigrants from another space were only taking jobs away from their citizens. The voice said to remember that immigration policy was designed to support slavery as an important economic factor. Yonsok was walking down the street and the voice in his headphones said to remember that those who choose to move to them have a home somewhere. But Earth is all people have. There were several crows sitting on a power line. A voice said if they lost Earth, they would have nowhere to go back to. The crows fluttered out of their seats. Black feathers slowly fell to the ground. Minjun caught one of the feathers and looked at it. The voice in Yonsok's headphones said as long as they have more and more allies, they can fight this propaganda. He said that so far the two races were the biggest threat to them. A man in a black suit with a mask over his eyes said dragons and orcs. Grabbing a microphone, he said that dragons are a social disaster and they are all dancing to their tune. The man said they should resist, overthrow and cast them out. With a wave of his hand, he said that orcs are just animals that breed like cockroaches. They are a biological disaster, and they should exterminate them all. He said that they had recently gotten news of another race that was just as bad as these two. A multitude of people in black suits and masks opened their mouths in amazement. The man said when he first heard about the 8th mass immigration, He couldn't contain his surprise. Pressing a button on the remote, he asked if any of them knew about the biological characteristics of this race. The man said that shootin' laid eggs almost every day, more than 10 at a time, and they could also reach 3.5 meters in height. He asked how much of their tax dollars it would take to tweak the infrastructure to accommodate them. Wrapping his arms around himself, the man asked what if they were just like orcs. He asked what if they are just as strong and committing crimes on every corner. Raising his index finger, the man said with a smile that this was why their association would use any method to stop the immigration planned by the committee. He said that the first thing they should do was to deal with one alien. A tall hotel building towered above the ground. A woman of small stature stood in front of Bradley, and she said that she hoped for his cooperation during his stay at the hotel. Bowing, the mustachioed woman said her name was Olga, and she was an interpreter. She is a female dwarf. She asked Bradley to follow her. Bradley asked how Princess Vermi was feeling. Olga was silent for a moment. Looking at him, she said that the princess was very worried right now. Olga said that she believed he was aware of the important talks between the Korean Committee and the Jelenko Kingdom about the security level. She said that they were very pleased that they could appoint a professional like him as security chief. Bradley, grinning awkwardly, said that she still thought that security was not enough. Olga said that she was just quite sensitive by nature. She told him not to think badly of her. They ended up in front of a large double door, and Olga said she had to leave him here and the princess in this room. She knocked on the door. The door opened and a green reptile wrapped in white cloth was seen in the room looking out the window. The reptile looked at them with yellow eyes. Opening its mouth, it let out a menacing roar. Princess Vermi looked like a huge crocodile bleeding saliva. Olga, wiping her face with a handkerchief, said that she expressed her joy at seeing him and hoped to work together in the future. Bradley asked her to assure her that she had nothing to worry about. Vermi looked at him joyfully, drooling. Above the brick building, stars twinkled in the night sky, and someone told Yonsok that his inspection was almost at an end. The hooded man said if he successfully completed the test, he would become a member of the Brotherhood. A rat flashed into the room, placing a few pictures on the table. He said there was something he wanted to tell him about before doing so. Yonsok took one of the photos in his hand. The man said it was about the tattoos he had gotten on the orcs. Yonsok asked what the problem was. The man asked about the fact that they were inscriptions in an ancient language, literally meaning humiliation and insult. Yonsok said that is true. The man said that the orcs, of course, didn't even realize it because in the past dimension they were treated like slaves and the illiteracy rate among them was 99%. Yonsok, stammering slightly, asked if there might be difficulties in joining the Brotherhood because of this. The man said that they had suspicions that they might get caught because of it if someone found out about it as easily as he did. But everyone eventually agreed that it was pretty funny. The man snapped his fingers and the pictures burned with purple flames. She told him not to leave any evidence from now on and that the tattoo parlor would have to close and open elsewhere. Rising from the couch, the man said they would help him with all the equipment he needed. Yonsok said he understood. The man said, then let's get started. The heavy double door opened and he said it was time to go through the last step of joining the Brotherhood. Yonsok said with a smile, yes. The rat looked up at the purple light. There was a space in the door with purple magic circles. Yonsok looked forward, sweating nervously. On the table lay bloody instruments of torture. A candle burned on the skull of an orc. A small, terrified orc was tied to a wooden cross with a red magic circle underneath it. The hooded man handed Yonsok a knife and asked if he understood what needed to be done. Yonsok took the knife in his hand, pressing his lips together. The man told him to show his anger and let justice be served. Nervously stepping forward, Yonsok repeated in his head, I can do this. As he approached the orc, he thought it was the same as slaughtering a rooster, and orcs are not humans. Yonsok thought about the fact that they themselves had almost killed him a few times. Remembering how beaten he was lying on the ground, he thought that everyone would be better off without them. The man told him to hurry up. The orc tried in vain to get out with tears in his eyes. The man told him to just repay them in kind. Yonsok's pupils narrowed and he swung his knife over the orc with a scream. He stabbed and black feathers began to slowly fall in the room. Yonsok's hands were severed and bleeding. Raising his severed hands, he looked at them in amazement. Yonsok screamed loudly in fear and pain, and his hands lay on the floor along with the knife. Someone slowly entered the room. People in white hoodies asked who did it. The hooded man thought he didn't even notice a single crack in the protective field, and he doesn't know who it is, but they are definitely high-ranking wizards. Calling out to the uninvited guest, he said since he was able to track them down and break down the defenses, he seemed to know a lot about them and was well aware of what would happen if he messed with them. Minjun slowly walked through the doors and asked, "So what?" His eyes glowed red. The protagonist said, "He only does what he has to do." Blair, bowing, said that she understood him perfectly, which is why she was asking. She said that no one could be trusted right now. Minjun looked at her in silence. Exhaling, he thought that his subordinates were still alive, and Jenkinson seemed to have lost his grip. Looking at Blair, he thought, not even dragons are timeless. Minjun asked if they knew what they were, since even the older ones had failed and they wanted him to take over. Blair said no, and she only wanted to ask him to find their tracks. She said she hoped he could do it before the chairman returned to Earth. Minjun asked when he was returning. Blair said, in about a week. Looking up and correcting her glasses, she told him that the space terminal could be shut down for the day, but they couldn't let them get rid of the evidence in that time. Minjun asked in surprise about the terminal being locked down. He figured he hadn't heard anything about that. He looked thoughtfully to the side and thought about the fight for human rights. He remembered a voice from the speakers in the truck talking about a party by and for the people, and about how humans had originally lived on Earth. As Minjun realized from the spirit's memories, they call themselves a brotherhood. And because of their actions, they are convinced that the Justice Association is a collection of terrorists with Nazi tendencies. The Justice Association spread all over the world, organizing many branches, and the last straw was the failure of the dragon-led operation. After that, it became almost impossible to find their top brass. The protagonist said he understood, but they must realize that it will not be easy. Blair and Larissa smiled happily. Exhaling, Minjun said he was sure they were aware, but he demanded compensation. Pulling out a small box, Blair said she would have everything ready. She said that this one is a blank check, and he can use it for both Earth currency and Dalent. She said it was already signed. The protagonist exclaimed in amazement about the blank check already signed. He wondered how much Jenkinson trusted him. Blair and Larissa gave each other high fives. Minjun, scratching the back of his head, thought he couldn't take advantage of that. Turning around, he said he would contact them as soon as he found something. Blair, bowing, thanked him. Closing his eyes, the protagonist thought that it wasn't that bad. He figured he didn't know who was in charge, but this guy caught his attention. He decided to pay him a visit and try to find out something. Minjun stood in front of a brick building surrounded by crows. People in white robes asked who it was. Minjun thought with a sinister grin, the more he found out, the more zeros he could draw on a blank check. He raised his palm upward. Red magic filled the room and the orc looked up at him fearfully. The protagonist clenched his palm into a fist. The orc opened his eyes fearfully. Lifting up, he looked around in amazement, finding that he was no longer bound. Minjun had told him he was free. The hooded man wondered what kind of spell this was and if it was even possible. He fearfully asked him to calm down. Looking at the main character who was reading the spell, he thought that he seemed to be a master at it, and it was unlikely that they could win even if they all pounced at once. The man smirked and told him that he would regret interrupting them after all. The object on each of their chests glowed purple, and he figured they had secretly gotten a magical shield from the witch community, and with it they could reflect any spell back at the attacker. The man thought, whatever spell he casts will hurt him. The man in the hoodie behind him was suddenly torn apart. Covered in his blood, the hooded guy turned around fearfully. Shrouded in a red aura, Minjun said that one mouthful would be enough for him to get information. Blood sprinkled the skull lying nearby. The man in the hoodie fell to the floor, splattering blood. An item of magical protection fell to the floor, burning with a dull purple flame. The hooded guy thought in amazement that he was able to break the witch's defense. He thought, if he's not a dragon, they should definitely be able to defeat him. Looking at Minjun, the guy wondered if it was possible that this guy was a dragon. Olga said that the princess consumes 20 kilograms of raw meat in one sitting, 6 times a day. She said the head of security would check to see if the food was poisoned. She asked to keep in mind that she will be staying in a hotel for a few days to rest after traveling. Olga said one more thing. She said that once a day, when the princess lays eggs, there should not be a soul around her within at least 10 meters. Olga asked to keep in mind the fact that the princess will be emotionally unstable at this point. Bradley asked about the fact that it usually happens around 8 in the morning. Olga said that because of the time zone difference, it might not happen regularly. She said as far as he could know, Shutan females regularly lay unfertilized eggs if they don't have a mate. Olga said their shells could be used to make metal with a high level of malleability and ductility. Glancing at Bradley, she said, in other words, it is a sacred ritual to produce gold. She asked if he understood everything. Bradley said with a smile that he understood everything and he would be careful. The guy in the hoodie told the guy in the hood that he would buy him some time. He opened his mouth, exposing sharp teeth, and thought that black magic was much more powerful when the caster fueled it with his own pain, and he was going to get out no matter what it cost him. The boy dug sharp into his arm. The most powerful black magic is still self-sacrifice in its pristine form. Guy slammed his bloody jaws shut and thought, years of life in exchange for salvation. A curse from my flesh and blood. Minjun calmly looked at him. He cast some incantation. The boy opened his eyes in astonishment. His head suddenly exploded. The hooded guy called out to him and he fell to the ground, smoke coming out of his head. The hooded guy said that was impossible. He asked how he did it. The main character said he was going to breathe fire anyway, and he just cursed him to make him more flammable. The hooded guy gritted his teeth and thought he was crazy, but his brother bought him time anyway. A purple magic circle appeared under his palm. He completed his final spell, spreading his arms out to the sides and laughing. He said he must have known about it since he calls himself a magician. The guy said it's a monster that consumes everything material and spiritual, a shadow monster. He said, unless you're a real dragon. Without finishing his sentence, the guy looked up fearfully. In front of him was a huge monster surrounded by a red aura. The guy behind him melted away, turning into a pool of blood. The protagonist said he finally understood, and now they would talk. Sitting on the couch, resting his face on his hand, Minjun noticed that he was awake. The guy with short hair, who had his hood off, looked up sharply. He asked why the Oslo school principal was against the Human Rights Alliance. Minjun asked about Oslo. Theo Christiansen, a criminal wanted by 26 states and master of the Oslo school, an infamous black mage. Minjun thought, it looks like he confused him with him. A bug appeared on his finger. The bug abruptly flew into the body of the guy sitting in front of him. The protagonist calmly watched as it shook. The guy spat sharply. The bug ended up on the ground, dead. Minjun said that even the happiness bug doesn't work. He said he was stronger than the members of the society. The guy told him not to waste his time and just kill it. He said he may not be as strong as him, but still he is also a dark mage and he won't talk even under torture. Rising from his seat, Minjun said then he should torture him so that he would talk after all. Taking a knife in his hand, he said that it would be easier to stick a worm in his brain and let him die peacefully. But that was his choice. The guy, smirking nervously, told him that he could bluff all he wanted, but he wouldn't open his mouth. Minjun said that he had recently met one dragon. Looking at the knife blade, he said that this 1,000-year-old gentleman tried to escape to another dimension when he was being chased. But he died because he was only 1 day late, so he thought he was the most pathetic creature in the world. The guy looked at him in amazement. The main character, looking at him in disgust, said, it looks like he's going to take that title away from him now. Looking at the purple knife blade, the guy thought, what kind of facial expression was that? Minjun said that he would regret being born. Tears of fear came from the guy's eyes. The main character was riding in an orange cab. He said over the phone that unfortunately he was unable to get any information about that incident in the B-39 vault, and due to the nature of the organization he cannot know the details of an operation he is not involved in. However, today has taken its toll and the human rights community is about to do something. He doesn't know if it will be an assassination or a kidnapping, but their next target is the princess to prevent the 8th mass immigration. Their important people will be involved too, and the vault embezzler is clearly among them. Blair on the other end of the call said she understood him. She asked if she could ask him something else. Minjun asked, what? He thought, it seems like their requests are getting bigger and bigger and he'll just start charging for his work. He thought, if he doesn't have enough money, he'll just borrow from someone. A blank check says, please pay the amount of the check presented. A bounce certificate can be written at any time. Someone asked if he was a Minjun agent. The protagonist arrived at the hotel building. Olga introduced herself and said that she was surprised that the immigration office had suddenly cut security personnel. They walked down the corridor of the hotel and she asked about him being the highest paid agent in the Korean immigration office. Olga said that the princess was also completely satisfied. Minjun thought that they would catch the accomplices of the Human Rights Association using the princess as bait, and in doing so, the princess would be completely safe. He thought, it seems Jenkinson and Blair are up to a dangerous game, and whether he succeeds or fails, he will be paid and lose nothing. They came to the right door and the protagonist thought, even if this case causes political turmoil, the committee will protect him because the prisoners are valuable assets of the committee. Knocking on the door, Olga said it was her and a new member of security had arrived. Apologizing, she opened the door. Sitting in the room were Princess and Bradley. Bradley looked at Minjun in amazement. The protagonist said hello and walked inside. The princess looked at him with her yellow eyes. The window was open and the wind was fluttering the curtains. The protagonist said his name was Minjun. The princess blushed embarrassedly, oozing saliva. Something pink filled the room. Touching his nose, the protagonist noticed that it was a pheromone. He thought about the fact that he could distinguish the sound of a rapid heartbeat here, and the room was filled with a pungent-smelling pheromone. The princess looked at him with a wide smile. Looking away, Minjun thought that this can't be happening. The princess abruptly opened her eyes wide. She shouted something loudly in her language. Olga asked in amazement, so suddenly. Bradley asked what the princess had said. Olga said that the man would work on producing gold. Bradley asked in amazement, did they do that in the morning? Olga said yes, but something happened. The princess put her hands on her stomach. Minjun walked thoughtfully to the window. The afternoon sun was shining in the blue sky. He thought that scorpions laid eggs even when the sun was at its zenith, and as far as he could remember, it used to be different. Bradley, coming up to him, said that he had not realized that they would send their agent to help him. Turning to Olga, the protagonist said they would talk and come back. They stepped out onto the hotel balcony. Bradley asked in surprise about the human rights community. The protagonist told him to be quiet. Bradley said that he suspected it but didn't expect it to actually be true and it could ruin everything. He said they sent someone like him on purpose. He asked about it being the princess's secret. Straightening up, Bradley said that he needed to check the terms of the contract again. There was a rumble, and he told the protagonist that it was no big deal and just something the princess came up with. Glancing to the side, Minjun thought, it seems like he had encountered something like this before. Lowering his gaze, he thought about the screams he had heard before coming to Earth. Bradley had said they had been from pain. He said the Sultan women told him what they had to go through every day, and it was a curse from nature. The protagonist wondered if it was always happening every day. He thought that somehow it didn't seem that way to him. Minjun wondered where this knowledge came from, whose it was, and why he knew all this. Bradley called out to the protagonist somewhat before he opened his eyes, pulled out of his musings. Bradley asked what he was thinking about, and if he had heard what he had said. Minjun apologized. Bradley continued talking about work. Next day, a red carpet was laid at the entrance to the building. Something in the room glowed brightly and shone. Bradley covered his face with his hand from the bright light. The princess stepped onto the carpet, her skin shining like gold. She stood before them, satisfied and radiant. Olga thought, it looks like she took a long time to choose her outfit. She figured there were no parties today, and they probably had the whole day scheduled by the hour. The princess looked around. When she saw something, she opened her eyes wide. Minjun looked at her. The princess, blushing embarrassed, looked away. The protagonist opened his mouth incomprehensibly. Olga walked over to them and said she had something to tell them. There was a military vehicle standing nearby. Behind Minjun and Bradley was an armored truck with a machine gun. The protagonist asked about suddenly choosing transportation instead of teleportation. He said he had a nice car ready for them. Bradley, rubbing his chin, said maybe the princess would change her mind and want to walk around the city. He asked if it was true that the princess was here for mass immigration, and wasn't she trying to be the first to see what a suitable dimension for immigration looked like. Bradley told the princess that they had separated the delegation of the diplomat and the security personage, and finalized the arrangement of the crew. Smiling, he said that in the princess's car would go the interpreter, he and his friend. Olga relayed his words to the princess in her language. Embarrassed, closing her eyes, the princess replied in her own language. Olga said, it will be done. Turning to the agents, she apologized. Olga asked if they could tell which of the two of them was stronger. An armored truck drove down the road. Princess sat in the truck, smiling and blushing. Minjun sat in the truck with an indifferent face. The princess looked somewhere to the side. The protagonist thought that the princess had said that she didn't like to be upset and she wished to minimize the number of people accompanying her. He remembered Olga asking Bradley if he could take a different car. The princess glanced at the protagonist. In her eyes, he was beautiful and sparkling. Princess put her hands on her chest and started stomping her foot quickly. Olga asked her in her language if something was bothering her. The princess looked at her and replied in her own language. A nervous sweat ran down Olga's face. The princess said something else, and Olga opened her eyes wide. The princess squeezed her legs between hers in embarrassment. Olga turned to Minjun. The protagonist looked at her. She said that she had already told the princess that and would tell him as well. Olga said that she was adhering to the ethical standards of a translator's work. Turning around, she frowned and said that she was just relaying the princess' words. She said that she would relay everything and immediately forget it, so he could be sure that nothing would spread. Minjun, probably sweating, thought, please don't. The princess embarrassedly covered her face with her hands. Olga said, whatever conversation you two are having. The protagonist in her thoughts asked her not to translate. The armored truck was driving fast on the city road. Minjun thought that money is the root of all problems. With a sideways glance, he decided to play along with the princess. The princess looked away embarrassed, and the protagonist thought he would interrupt her if she started to overdo it. Olga translated the princess's question. Is your name Minjun? The protagonist said yes. The princess asked if he had ever been to the Jelenko dimension. Minjun said no and asked to tell him about Jelenko. The princess said it was very beautiful there. It's a silvery blue night, with 2 moons decorating the sky. A light breeze gently touches the water surface, where amphibians and plants stretch relaxedly, and 4 winged birds, enjoying the fragrance of the flowers, sing with the arrival of spring. It's a gorgeous place, and I feel very lucky to call it home. The princess said she had heard that he was a quarter elf, and he was born and raised here. She asked his age. Minjun said he was born in 1945. He figured that was the kind of biography the committee came up with for him. The princess exclaimed in amazement that he was so young, and it wasn't even half her age. Wagging her tail, she asked how long quarter elves lived. The protagonist said he didn't know himself. The princess asked if he had ever thought about living in some other dimension. Minjun lowered his gaze and thought it was time to end this play. He started to speak and the princess suddenly apologized. Hugging her tail, she asked him to forget everything she had said. The princess squinted her eyes in embarrassment. Smiling widely, she said that it was the first time she met someone so beautiful. The princess apologized again and asked him to forget all the nonsense she said to him. Minjun thought she gave him goosebumps. An armored truck was driving over a large bridge. The princess said that she had never been in the same room with a man of another dimension before, which was obvious for such a humble shootin' lady. She said that is why many shootin' ladies can be confused about their emotions. The princess asked to think of her behavior today as if she was just a little confused, and apologized if she made him uncomfortable with her confusion of emotions. Minjun said it was fine. He said it must be that shootin' girls are subjected to the pressures of the loyalty cult. The princess said he was right. The protagonist asked how long have they had this tradition. The princess said she never really thought much about it, but since shootin' history was destroyed in the interracial wars, she said, coming out, their traditions are at least 800 years old. A dialogue box appeared in front of Minjun, and he thought something didn't add up. Comparing it to what he had studied about the Jelenko dimension, the information about interracial warfare does not match. They lay unfertilized eggs in the middle of the day, and the pheromone can even have an effect on other races. It can have an effect on him too. What the princess is saying is very different from what he was taught. Minjun thought about what it was like before he became a prisoner. On the dialogue box it said that the prisoner would be subject to selective memory deletion. He wondered if that meant he might still have bits of 800-year-old memories. The protagonist thought. It was also said that Jelenko is as united a kingdom made up of many races as Earth. The Shutin are much stronger than the other races, and because of this they were forced to fight the other races alone. They eventually lost this interracial war. As a result, the Shutin's political power sank to the bottom of the entire Jelenko dimension. Minjun approached the princess. He said that many residents believed that Shutin had visited them to prepare for mass immigration. The princess said the rumors have reached her as well, but it all comes from not knowing them well. She said that Earth's climate and infrastructure are ill-suited for them. The protagonist said she was right. The princess said that this small star is not capable of accepting them, and even if they were to prepare for immigration, it would take them a lot of time and resources. Minjun said that they were really here on business. The princess licked her lips and said if she could solve one problem, she would become fertile and could give birth and outrun the other princesses. Minjun thought, from what he remembered, once a Shutin woman lays a fertilized egg, then ovulation stops for decades. He figured they were trying to get rid of nature's curse. A blue circle appeared near the protagonist's ear. A voice from it said that they were almost at Gonduk Station, just as she had said. An armored truck was heading towards Gonduk. Bradley asked for their exact location. Princess stood up from her seat and asked for her words to be relayed to everyone. She said that they were heading to the Korean pension fund. The protagonist said that it was probably none of his business and asked if she had any appointments. The princess said she was doing it on purpose. She said that surprising them is part of her plan. The guy in the dark suit asked in amazement over the phone about Princess. There was a commotion in the office and he asked why they only gave 5 minutes notice of the princess visit. Someone shouted to quickly contact management. The princess said, collection of long-term outstanding debts. Ominously, she turned around and said that was the reason for her visit to Earth. The armored truck came to a stop. Guys in dark suits stood tiredly at the entrance, breathing heavily and adjusting their clothes. There were a huge number of people standing at the entrance, and the princess was walking towards them. Behind her walked the men in black and the crocodile men. The protagonist thought that the princess had really taken them all by surprise. He thought, originally Gondok Station wasn't even close to the government route that the princess was supposed to take. Looking at the people in black suits, Minjun thought that these people didn't even realize that the princess was here to repay her debts. The princess stood loftily above them. The people in black suits looked down at her in amazement. The princess abruptly demanded to bring their boss. Minjun looked up at the tall skyscraper in front of him. He looked at the signboard. The protagonist thought about this company. Someone had said that the CEO was returning to the company. Bradley looked at his wristwatch and said that they should have arrived by now. Hearing the sound, he turned around. Looking at the door, he said it must be them. The door swung open. Mansik apologized to the princess for keeping her waiting and said that he was the director of this company. He looked in amazement in front of him. Oh, Mansik, the director of Korea's pension fund. He noticed Minjun, and the latter turned around. Someone said he had checked security, so the agents could wait for them outside. Bradley was sitting on the couch, whistling while looking at his phone. Minjun thought he knew that the alchemy company was in a tough spot because of the biosynthetic gold. Lowering his gaze, he thought, it comes out that Mansik was one of the princess debtors. However, Princess is leading the biosynthetic gold market, so he decided to borrow from a competitor. The protagonist thought, Mansik may be old, but not old enough to make such a mistake. He opened his cell phone. Minjun thought, did he not know it was a princess, or did the creditor change halfway through? He thought, he shouldn't do a job he wasn't assigned. The protagonist wondered if he could say it wasn't a job, but a personal request. He figured that he and Mansik had known each other for a long time, so he would make an exception and look into the matter. Minjun thought, they say accidents are not random. Kathy in the office asked in amazement, Minjun. She looked at the phone. He said, Korean pension fund. Pass the information to the government and let me know their reaction. The protagonist thought that Kathy should know what to do about this. He thought the government would know that it would be better to help than to watch aliens take over a Korean company. Minjun thought, in fact, they are violating the purpose of the escort. Kissing the princess's hand, Mansik greeted her. The princess said if the formalities were over, she would listen to how they planned to repay the debt. Lowering his gaze, Mansik said yes. The offer was too attractive to refuse. As gold prices plummeted, the pension fund went bankrupt. Pensions facing bankruptcy. While many pension funds went negative, Mansik, who truly believes in himself, did not stop gold production. If you put your all into it, you will overcome all obstacles and get up from your knees again. However, when he began to realize that he was losing ground, they came to find him. A bald man with a blue folder in his hand told him that he had an offer for him that he definitely couldn't refuse. He asked him to take a look because he was sure he wouldn't regret it. Mansik looked at the papers in amazement. Monoselective filter, an essential material for synthetic gold, which is 100% dependent on imports from other dimensions. Seeing their predicament, they promised to supply the monoselective filter at an unthinkable low price. Mansik said that they did not even have that kind of money right now. Mansik offered him a loan which he would repay as soon as he could. But the company's situation gradually worsened, and they offered more and more monoselective filter in exchange for more and more debt. Until one day they were contacted and told that their debt had been sold to another party, and the name of the creditor was Shootin' Princess Vermi. Mansik stood next to the presentations with various charts. The princess shouted that she had never heard more nonsense in her life. She said it was all lies and she didn't believe a word of it. Mansik said that they have done everything possible. The princess screamed about how she didn't believe it. She said either they repay the debt immediately or accept their terms. Mansik asked about their terms. Olga handed him a clipboard with papers. Mansik looked at the papers, frowning in amazement. He asked if it meant just giving them his company. He asked why Shootin' needed a company that produced gold. The princess said it was none of his business. She said that the company to which the shares would be given was a company legally established on Earth. Princess got to her feet and said that she had already discussed it with the attorneys for both parties, so there could be no legal problems. She asked what he would choose, bankruptcy or transferring the stock. Princess said if he chooses the latter, she would guarantee that current employees would keep their jobs. She said he wouldn't be able to turn away either way. Bowing his head, Mansik asked to give them time to think it over. The princess said she would be back at the same time tomorrow. The armored truck was driving down a city street. Princess told Olga that she was hungry. Olga said she took some snacks with her. She opened a drawer that contained raw meat. The princess began to eat with gusto. She bit off a piece of meat with her teeth. The smell of raw meat and blood filled the room. Minjun rubbed his nose thoughtfully. He thought that there was some other odor mixed in with the meat smell, and it definitely wasn't coming from the meat. The protagonist thought it was the princess. He thought it wasn't a shootin' pheromone. He remembered that it was similar to the pheromone that bugs give off when they communicate. Minjun wondered why it was suddenly coming from the princess. He thought they might be similar, but it's definitely something else. Maybe it's a specially made chemical, and when it comes in contact with air it oxidizes to this pheromone. Minjun thought, no, the elemental composition of the pheromone contains noble metals. He thought, something has seeped into the princess's body, and through chemical reactions is changing inside her. The princess continued to eat the meat with a satisfied look. The protagonist quickly approached the princess, calling out to her. The princess asked in amazement what he was doing. Minjun said something, but she couldn't hear him. She looked at him in amazement. Confused, the princess closed her eyes. She pulled her lips forward, ready for a kiss. Minjun recoiled, wrinkling his nose in disgust. He motioned for Olga to tell the princess to open her mouth. Olga obeyed. She relayed the protagonist's words to the princess. Something black appeared in the air. The driver asked in surprise what it was. A black spot hovered in the air above the road. It was a huge cloud of insects that flew swiftly forward. Minjun exclaimed that it was a trap. The insects surrounded the armored truck. The window by the driver's seat shattered. Olga and the princess turned around frightened. The protagonist turned around tensely. Blue beams struck the armored truck. The committee had categorized the creature as a first-degree threat, a hornet manova, particularly dangerous, about the size of a thumb, inside a rugged exoskeleton, the kind commonly used in spaceship construction. They create a magnetic field by spreading their wings and diving at high speed. This plasma-powered mini-spaceship crashes into the target at breakneck speed. A swarm of insects flew away from the destroyed armored truck. The truck was smoking. Its hatch opened with force. A pillar of dark purple energy rushed into the sky. Minjun held the princess on the ground, shrouded in purple energy. His body was half shrouded in purple magic. Olga's bloody corpse lay on the pavement. The protagonist, clenching his teeth, swore. An army of insects rushed towards them. Minjun swung his purple magic, blocking the insects. He figured he didn't have time to deal with them one by one. The protagonist bit his lip with force, and blood spurted from it. The insects surrounded him. Minjun took a deep breath. A stream of red flames rushed out, incinerating the insects. The protagonist thought, their shells may be hard, but their insides are definitely not hard. He thought he would envelop the fire so that their insides would boil. The insects flew in the opposite direction of the blast of magic. Minjun exclaimed in amazement. He swung his hand with dark purple magic. The insects crashed into the magic like a shield. Minjun wondered why they didn't care. He thought that they were filled with mana, not life force, and probably the mana of whoever was controlling them. The protagonist thought that these insects were too survivable. Bradley looked at the cloud of insects in the sky. He shouted to the protagonist that their target was the princess. Minjun thought that they had only come for her. It hit him, and he opened his eyes wide. He flew forward, leaving a purple magical trail behind him, holding the princess in his arms. The princess was on the verge of passing out. Minjun dragged her by her tail, thinking that he wouldn't be able to fight them and protect the princess at the same time. He thought that he needed to find a protective barrier first. The protagonist looked at the bookstore. He spoke telepathically about turning on the shield. Lakefield, who was reading a book, asked whose voice it was. Minjun landed with his hand touching the ground. Lakefield looked up at the ceiling. The main character's hand was glowing with a yellow light. He activated the strongest barrier in the building. A bright yellow light illuminated everything around him. Minjun got to his feet, surrounded by the yellow magic barrier. Exhaling, he looked at the insects crashing into the magic barrier. The magic barrier was gradually getting covered in cracks. Minjun looked outside, sliding the blinds open. The princess was yelling about something, and Lakefield said he couldn't understand a word. The protagonist said, neither did I. He apologized to him for dragging him into all this. Lakefield, embracing a frightened Donchul, told him not to worry because they were fine. Minjun thanked him for understanding. He said he sent a request to the bureau, so the place will be cleaned up soon. Looking at the princess, the protagonist thought about whether he should try to talk to her on a mental level. He telepathically asked her if she could hear him. He asked her to remain calm. The princess exclaimed in amazement. She shouted something in her own language. Minjun told her that help was on the way. He said there must be some words that they both understood. He asked if she had made contact with anyone today or if anyone had touched her. Minjun thought that first we need to find out where those chemicals in the princess's body came from. All of her food is thoroughly tested, so this was clearly not an accident. Since the hornets haven't attacked any other shootin', that means this chemical isn't airborne. So it's something only the princess came in contact with. The princess said something in her own language. The protagonist thought, judging by her reaction, she knows what he's talking about. Rubbing his chin, he wondered if there was no way the princess could answer him. Lakefield asked if he needed an interpreter. Minjun asked if he could. Lakefield asked Donchul to bring that thing from the vault. The protagonist thought incomprehensibly about that thing in the vault. Donchul came back and said, I brought it. Frying Pan winked at them happily. Minjun opened his eyes wide. He said if they just knocked her out with the frying pan, she'd definitely shut up, but still, he wanted to hear something else from her, so they'd do that later. Lakefield, laughing, asked what he was talking about. He asked if he had scored, which was what the pan kept talking about. Looking away, Minjun said it only talked about all sorts of perversions. Lakefield said, looks like he'd forgotten that the thing had a mental communication function after all. Donchul looked heavily at the frying pan in his hand. The protagonist remembered Chongpul asking him what the frying pan said. The frying pan said to forget misunderstandings because it understands them on a mental level. The frying pan in Minjun's hand groaned and said inappropriate things. Insects surrounded the magical barrier. The princess took the frying pan in her hand. The protagonist asked her if she had made contact with anyone or touched anything. He told the frying pan to translate. The pan moved slightly in the princess's hand. The princess opened her eyes in astonishment. She sharply shouted something in her language. Minjun covered her ears with his fingers. He asked her to remain calm. The protagonist touched her hand. The princess blushed and opened her mouth. He thought irritably that this was not the time for embarrassment. Minjun told the pan to speak what the princess said. He looked at the frying pan questioningly. The frying pan apologized and said that she got confused because my lady is very mischievous. The protagonist asked if she was going to answer. The frying pan said she was very expressive and said she didn't know who did it, but when they were caught, she would scalp them and boil them in salt water. Minjun thought the thing had become even more talkative. He told the pan with a threatening expression that he was giving it 3 minutes to tell him whatever the princess said. Trying to think of what to do with the frying pan otherwise, he looked away. The protagonist said he would leave it lying in the dirtiest corner of the pantry forever. The princess continued talking into the frying pan, and the protagonist looked at his phone. He said she had sent him a lot of messages. Kathy folded her arms across her chest and said that it would be nice if he would let her know that he was alive. Minjun said that he hadn't gotten around to it yet. Glancing at the phone screen, he asked, have you looked into it yet? Kathy said yes, and state aid doesn't look like an easy task, and they don't seem to be to the government's liking. She said, paying fines every year for the same thing, failing to meet deadlines, so the government doesn't want to help them. The protagonist asked, same problems every year. Kathy asked if he knows about the employment quota system. Companies over a certain limit have to hire dwarves, orcs, and trolls in a certain ratio. But this company employs 97.2% humans, 2.8% elves, and none of the other races. Kathy said, in simple words, there is no one in this company except humans and a couple elves. Minjun thought about human chauvinism. They put themselves above everyone else and discriminate against all races other than humans. Yet they accept elves, calling them good and useful. But they do not recognize any race, thinking they are not good enough, explaining it with all sorts of nonsense like they are too low, breed too fast, too tall, and so on. They only judge them on the basis of their danger to humans. Minjun thought about how Mansik had done. He asked the frying pan if it had memorized everything. The protagonist took the frying pan in his hands and told her to narrate. Frying pan said that she had not touched anything out of the ordinary throughout today, only had contact with some people. Minjun asked exactly who she was in contact with and wanted names. She said she was gently fondled by Minjun at first. The protagonist angrily yelled that no such thing had happened. Frying Pan said there was another person. He asked who. Frying Pan gave her answer. After looking at her for a bit, Minjun closed his eyes. Kathy asked what the Frying Pan said. The protagonist put his palm on his face and exhaled heavily. A black car was driving down a city street under an overcast sky. Bradley looked at the screen of his phone with a smile. Minjun had told him that the princess was safe. He told him to find out who was behind the attack. He said it was possible she was attacked by something unknown, but there was nothing they couldn't trace as long as they had his ability. Bradley smirked. Bradley's ability involves clairvoyance, the ability to look through objects, augmented by the psychometry of non-contact vision. The light reflecting from his eyes is not magic at all, but a path made into the physical world by the thousands of bugs that have flown in. Bradley thought the idea of transforming Hornet's Manhwa was simply brilliant, and they probably thought they were safe since the caster had no reason to show himself. Smiling, he figured they just didn't know about his secret and he would definitely catch them. A dialogue box appeared in front of Bradley's face, and he thought that if he helped track down the higher-ups from the Humane Society, maybe he'd get a bonus of 5,000 talent. He only had 10,000 left to pay out. Earth Dimension Agent, U.S. Division, Bradley. The balance owed is 10,000 talent. Bradley thought he would be able to pay off half of it. His total ransom amount is 70,000 talent, which is pennies in comparison. Looking out the window, Bradley thought, when he gets his memory back, he will definitely not turn out to be an unthinkable criminal like Talesia who killed herself because of guilt after remembering everything. He said to drive through the tunnel and thought he had a good feeling about it. Bradley thought he finally felt free. Black cars pulled into the underground parking garage. People in black suits and Bradley got out of the cars. Bradley looked forward in amazement. In front of him was a man in a hooded cloak. The guy with dark hair asked if it was him. Bradley remained silent in amazement. He wondered why he was standing there alone. He wondered if he was scared that they had arrived earlier than expected. The guy took off his hood with a smirk on his face. Bradley figured it wasn't that simple, and he had been waiting for them. The guy's fingers flashed red and he recited a spell. Bradley opened his eyes fearfully. He wondered in horror where he had come from. Turning around, he yelled for everyone to run. A line of red energy flew through him. The magic sliced him in half, splattering him with blood. The guys in black suits watched fearfully as he fell to the floor. A man in a coat with blonde hair and blue eyes grinned madly. Black cars were speeding down the city road. Looking at the business card, Minjun thought about the day he came to the Witches' Cooperative. He remembered how he met the lawyer with dark blue skin and Mansik. Looking at the business card, the protagonist thought that Mansik had hired a troll lawyer that day. He thought that's why he didn't suspect that he was a human chauvinist, but did he just do it for the sake of his image? Squinting, Minjun wondered if the reason he ignored the law on hiring other races, hid his past, and even kissed Shuten's hands was because he wanted to avoid being labeled a human chauvinist. The protagonist clutched the business card in his hand. A black car was approaching the skyscraper. Mansik had a belief to stop foreign companies from encroaching on their market and to protect their market. For the sake of that, even when other competitors were closing down, he would keep the alchemy store running, even if it was hard. If this job disappears, alchemists will start going abroad. As long as talented people kept going overseas, Korea's gold market would be taken over by foreign companies. It held on for the sake of their people, their country, and their workers. But all those efforts were ruined by this little piece of paper. If you think about it, those who offered MSF something that heavily relies on foreign imports at such a low cost were in league with the princess. This offer was a trap for the princess to swallow this company. Mansik threw the piece of paper into the trash can. He sat down in his chair. Mansik exhaled tiredly. They won't be able to help the chairman. He thought about that moment when the Human Rights Society paid him a visit. A bloody masked guy with a bloodthirsty smile said they had been interested in him and the Korean pension fund for a long time. He suggested that as people fighting together for the sake of the people, he could show the princess their anger. He said that one of the reasons the princess came to Korea must be because of his debt. Guy asked if there was a reason to come specifically to Korea out of all the countries on Earth. He said with a smirk that he just had to do a few minor things and he didn't have to worry about evidence. They shook hands and the man said they would take care of everything else. Mansik thought, if everything went according to plan, the Human Rights Society promised him to take care of the remaining debt and continue sponsoring him after that. With a smile, he thought that he would be able to continue operating his alchemy store and the gold market of this country would be safe. The phone on the table rang. Mansik asked what it was. The voice on the phone told him that they had a big problem. He said that the Immigration Bureau is on the first floor of the lobby right now. Mansik exclaimed fearfully. The protagonist walked among the men in black suits, one of whom ordered a search of every corner. They walked forward with grim faces. Mansik sat silently in his office, trembling. He wondered how, for he had said there would be no evidence left. He thought of the stories he had heard about the famous Immigration Bureau agents. Since the Human Rights Society was involved, it was obvious what would happen. Mansik thought, if he is caught, he will be tortured until he is haggard, and even if he survives, he will be no better than a corpse. He thought, in that case, he'd better take control of his life and die an easy death. There were 2 green clots in his hands, and Mansik thought it was an instant poison that would immediately kill him as soon as he breathed it in. He brought the green clot up to his mouth. Several belts flew into the room. The belts bound Mansik. He asked why he was here. Mansick said about the Hornets. Minjun said if he is talking about Manhwa Hornets, then the Immigration Bureau has successfully cleared them. He told him starting now, he will have to tell them all about the Human Rights Society. Mansick apologized and said he would have to keep quiet. The protagonist said that he should have expected this before coming up with such plans. He said, in accordance with the Fourth Amendment of the Korean Constitution, his right as a citizen of this country will be partially restricted. Frowning, Mansick asked why they were taking the aliens' side. He said angrily, of the 7 mass migrations, they humans at least welcomed them elves. He shouted why he chose to side with these monsters. Mansick shouted why, if they welcomed the elves. The protagonist looked at him with disgust. Publicly, his race is quarter elf. Even when he is 75% human, he still calls him elf. Looking at Mansick's angry face, Minjun thought he was a human chauvinist who doesn't accept even the slightest admixture of other blood. He asked if that was why he worked together with the Human Rights Society. He asked if their ultimate goal was to get rid of any race other than humans on planet Earth. The protagonist said, banish them or kill them. He asked if he knew how horribly they treated other races. Mansick calmly asked what was wrong with that. Minjun opened his eyes in shock. Mansick asked why he should care if the monsters die or not, since they weren't even human. Minjun looked at him tiredly. He said he had no intentions of torturing him. Frowning, the protagonist said it would be better if he was tortured by a dragon instead. Who would take it easy? He said, by the strange and nasty magic the dragons can use, there is a magic that can increase brain function to its peak. Something that he can't even recollect will all be revealed. The surroundings when he met with the Human Rights Union, the voice of the person, what the person was wearing in detail, everything will come out word by word. Men in black suits began to take Mansick away, and the protagonist said, of course it will be a painful process, but he cannot die until they get everything they need from him. Mansick's face contorted in horror, and Minjun said aside from the ancient dragon, agents with strong holy powers would make sure he stayed alive. He glanced at his phone. Picking it up, he asked what was going on. Blair said something to him. The protagonist, taking the phone away from his ear, looked out the window. It was raining over the night city. Minjun and Blair entered an underground parking lot drenched in blood. The protagonist asked her what about that thing he asked her to check out. Blair said that according to the agent's report that was sent to check it out, Bradley's breathing had already left the area, and they couldn't find it. The committee uses a miraculous magic that sends the prisoner's soul to another body. But it takes the committee much time and resources to use such magic. So, for a soul that's left the body, even they won't be able to find it. The protagonist thought, so Bradley is dead. Bradley's corpse was lying on the ground with a bouquet of roses instead of a head. The ghostly image of a man asked if it was beautiful. The image put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder and said that this bouquet was for him. The image dissolved, leaving a red trace in the air. The suspect left traces in the spirit world for a purpose. Are you satisfied now? Fine, then let's see how it turns out. From the perpetrator's traces, the protagonist made out the words, "Baby, I missed you." He thought he'd tear him apart as soon as he saw him. Minjun said they needed to send the princess back to her dimension. He said the terminal might be closed, but if they talked to Jenkinson, they might be able to make an exception for them. The protagonist said that they planned to use the princess as bait to capture the higher-ups of the Human Rights Union. He said the current situation is very different from what they expected, and they hired an outside mercenary. Minjun said that means the chances of the higher-ups showing themselves are zero. Walking past Blair, he said they need to stop this dangerous game of cat and mouse. The protagonist said while he is safely escorting the princess, she should prepare to send the princess back as soon as possible, so that he would no longer need to protect the princess, and he could focus on killing the villain to his fullest potential. At the same time, at the dimensions 51-532 of the second terminal, Jenkinson asked what he just said. The guy in the suit said warp to Earth, and Jenkinson asked what he was trying to say. Turning around, he said, in simple words, the warp that remained intact despite 5-dimensional jumps with just one warp left to reach Earth broke down. Putting his hands on his hips, Jenkinson said angrily, beyond that, the repairs will take 3 days. He wondered why that was when he had decided to go to Blair's place. Jenkinson asked what about other warps, and if there were any other warps they had permission from the committee to use. He said to find it quickly. The man handed him a clipboard and said he had already looked. Looking at the clipboard, Jenkinson said if they used this warp, they would have to make too many stops and would be delayed too much. He noticed something. Jenkinson asked why this race was traveling toward Earth alone in a situation like this. The man said they just got a message from Blair. Jenkinson said he hoped it was good news this time. A hologram of Blair appeared in front of him and greeted him by bowing. She said that she had contacted him in hopes that he would approve the request as a matter of urgency. Blair said something, and Jenkinson asked irritably, "What?" Blair told Minjun she finished. The protagonist asked if she had gotten permission. Blair, breathing heavily, said yes, and the chairman contacted the committee directly. She said they could take off if it was one of the warps the princess used. The protagonist offered to start moving out right away. The voice said it was a message to all wizards for this plan. Currently, Princess Vermi and the escorts from Shuda will be escorted by teleportation. A man in a black suit was holding a machine gun. Destination: the international airport in Yongjongdo. People with dogs were walking around the closed door to the VIP room. The princess was talking to the frying pan. The protagonist thought of what this frying pan said about mental connection. He thought this type of translation is BAL HWA, the principle of reading the speaker's verbalized surface consciousness, in other words, mind reading. No such explanation was in the manual, and much of it was destroyed because of the lawsuit. Is it possible that this pan is the only one left in the entire universe? Minjun wondered who could have put such a rare ability into the frying pan. Among all the people he had met in his 800-year prison life, only Bradley possessed such a talent. Folding his hands into a lock, the protagonist thought, if this is the possessor of such a rare ability, they will be able to live well even after they are released from prison. He thought to himself, he didn't expect to die a dog's death. Minjun saw the frying pan in front of his face. The princess stood in front of him with the frying pan in her hand, and the protagonist wondered if she wanted to tell him something. He put his hand on her arm. The princess said that she had heard that his comrade had died this time. She said that she felt uncomfortable knowing that it happened because of her. Princess apologized. The protagonist said it wasn't her fault. Princess said that she heard that the tension between the races on Earth is high, but she didn't expect something like this to happen. Minjun said that it was expected because there have been 7 mass immigrations here in such a short period of time, and the occurrence of such problems is something to be taken for granted. Princess said she could understand that. She said that things may not be as bad in the Jelenko dimension as they are on Earth, but it has experienced several mass immigrations over time, and on top of that, they have had to go through many race wars. Of course, the race that sacrificed the most were the natives, the Shutans. Minjun said he was about the fact that the history of the race wars had been almost completely lost, and there were some stories that had been passed down. Blair apologized for interrupting their conversation and asked if she could say something. Minjun asked what was wrong. Blair said that they might have to wait a few hours before they could use dimensional warp. She said they need to send a report to the committee so they won't be suspected of smuggling people in. Blair said that the wait had increased compared to when they entered. The princess opened her eyes in embarrassment. She whispered something to the protagonist. Minjun, she bought some gems. Blair said she understood, and it should go quickly because life force was not detected. The main character thought about the fact that she bought so many that it affected the ship. He figured she had extra money after all. Minjun figured that his job as a bodyguard would be over in a few hours, and after he pranced back, he would take care of whoever killed Bradley. There was a loud sound and everyone jumped up from their seats. A loud scream could be heard over the building. The guy in the black suit crouched to the ground and the others asked what happened. The guy's skin began to melt and he screamed in pain. He looked at his palms in horror. One of the guys shouted that it was poison. He said to break the detoxification scroll urgently. Blair, seeing people running on the roof, turned her attention to the protagonists. Minjun thought it would save him time looking for it, and he would usually tear it to shreds. The hooded man surrounded by monsters grinned madly. The 126 countries' governments and 6 elders are chasing after. Dark magician, Theo Christiansen. He was surrounded by an army of orc-like monsters walking through the water. Theo said that poison and zombies were just part of the set. Smirking, he said, because I don't want my meeting with you to be interrupted, Minjun. Screams echoed over the airport. Blood was running on the ground. The guy with the machine gun shouted to quickly tear the scroll of antidote and carry the wounded. Looking down, he gritted his teeth and swore. He remembered him talking about how it was creepy and you couldn't see anything, and it was the worst conditions for defense. Carl Hood, Republic of South Africa affiliated agent magician. Main weapon, 20mm cannon. An elf with long hair gathered in a ponytail asked if he had seen a picture of the site. Carl said no. The elf said that he had been an agent for a long time, but he had never seen anything like it, and that was enough to make one think that the dead Bradley was lucky. He said the others had been tortured to death, and the killer must surely have to be a dark mage. Carl, swearing, said there was a saying that messing with them would bring bad luck for the next 3 generations. He said once they hold a grudge, they will follow the offender to the ends of the earth, and they can't even be killed because they are like cockroaches. The elf asked uncertainly about the fact that they must be okay. He said that along with them there is one called Legend who has completed many missions with Elder Dragon. Rapid machine gun shots were killing the zombie orcs. Flashes of gunfire flashed everywhere. The military man spoke of zombies approaching from the beach. He ordered the agents to be summoned. The guy picked up the phone and started to speak, but soon his hand fell off with the phone. He screamed loudly in pain and horror. A column of bright light was rising from the machine near the airport. Carl and the elf could hear screams from the devices in their ear. Carl thought that there was only one bridge that led to Yongjongdo, and the idea that everything would be okay if they could protect the place was a mistake. He thought, since mass teleportation was impossible, he made the zombies cross during low tide. Carl barked out a curse while touching the blue magic circle on his ear. He finished briefing the current situation. Minjun said he understood. Blair asked what they should do now. The protagonist told her that she should take the shuttles to the warp ship and leave right away, and he would report back to the committee. Blair said, but the committee has yet to. Minjun said, emergency warp code. Blair's eyes went wide. He said that normally the chairman would have it, but since they were in another dimension, he had to leave it to her as the chief secretary. Blair asked how he knew that. She thought she really had it, made only by the committee and only able to use with their permission, dimension warp. For that reason, you have to get their permission to use it every time. In order to use it, you need a permission warp code. Blair thought, in an emergency, without their permission, the emergency warp code that's allowed by the terminal manager. She figured most people didn't know that. Looking at Minjun, she thought, just who is he? The protagonist spoke through a device in his ear. He told all the agents who could move to accompany the princess and send her to the warp ship. The guy in the dark suit listened to his words, standing not far from the 2 shootins. Minjun told Blair that he was leaving the princess to her. The princess shouted something. She looked after him with a smile. The protagonist thought he would meet him again. The asphalt around him was covered in fog. He took off sharply from the ground. Floating in the air with a knife in his hand, he looked at the warp. He wondered if he was telling him to find him on his own. Minjun found the hooded man among the zombie orcs. He thought for sure he would kill him. Bounty 200,000 dalent. The protagonist rushed forward, swinging his knife. Theo, shrouded in a green aura, said it reminded him of the incident when he destroyed his school. He said he wanted to be together with the elder dragons that time. Now it was just the 2 of them. Calling him a parasite who lives off dragons, Theo said he would tear him apart with his real black magic. Minjun jabbed the knife into his palm. Then he slashed his arm up to his shoulder in a sharp motion and said that this time he would tear him apart. Theo looked at him with his hands shrouded in green magic, smiling madly. The light stopped coming from the warp. Theo stood in front of a huge mountain of zombies. A bright red light appeared from the mountain of zombies. Minjun scattered the zombies around him with a strong blast of red energy. He asked with a threatening look, "Is that it?" Theo grinned and raised up 2 fingers shrouded in red magic and said, "You wish." A huge pillar of red-orange energy rose above the ground. Surrounded by green magic circles, Theo shouted that he had created dozens of original spells just to kill him. Shooting green magic, he said he wouldn't let him die until he tried each one of them, one at a time, one step at a time. There was a huge green explosion. Theo watched the explosion with a mad smile on his face. Minjun stepped out of the cloud of dust. Theo's face creased with shock and anger. The main character, shrouded in a purple aura, said as he asked him if that was it. Behind him stood a huge dark silhouette. Theo swung his hand with purple magic. He thought something was wrong. He thought that the original spells he had prepared for this day were not working. His hands were covered in blood, and Theo thought that he had prepared for everything. But it turns out even that much dark energy isn't enough. He thought that for the last month his hands had not even had a chance for the wounds on them to be able to heal. The Minjun was slowly approaching him, and Theo thought that he had been diligently preparing, that the screams of the victims were still ringing in his ears. Pink energy ran through the ground. Theo wondered why. The protagonist walked on the cracked ground. Theo yelled out why nothing was working. Minjun silently walked towards him with a grim expression, shrouded in a purple aura. Theo Christiansen, the name given to him by his parents, who are devout. Unlike the meaning of his name, God's gift, his high talent in dark magic was like a slap in the god's face. Slums somewhere in Europe. The goblin said gratefully that he had no idea he would provide them with food and labor. Grinning, Theo beckoned the goblins inside. The door slowly closed. Not that he hated orcs or goblins. The goblin saw before him a torture room full of blood and tortured goblins. He just didn't want to be disturbed while he studied dark magic. Turning around, the goblin asked what about food and work. Theo grinned evilly and stabbed his knife, since no one will care even if orcs or goblins disappear in droves. A guy with glasses shouted into the loudspeaker that even when a group of goblins went missing in Eastern Europe, the Union of Europe did nothing. There were several protesters standing in the street, and the guy with the glasses shouted that they didn't care if the goblins lived or died. He shouted about how they might find themselves in a similar position themselves. A large man said he liked how clean the streets had become since those monsters disappeared. Another guy spat in their direction and asked if they were on the side of the monsters or the side of the humans. The guy said they needed to create a society that would protect the weak. Someone pushed him and he fell down. Theo in bloody clothes turned around and looked at him with a cold stare. The boy looked at him fearfully. Theo, walking away, thought that this was only good for him, and with people behaving like this, he could explore dark magic without restrictions. Theo disappeared into the street crowd. Dragons flew across the dark sky. The military surrounded the house saying that Theo Christiansen was here. A voice behind Minjun said that it looked like all the small fries were already taken care of. Dragon asked what about Theo Christiansen. Minjun said they are looking for him right now. He said judging by the fact that many of the corpses are still fresh, he may have escaped, using many as victims to break through their entrapment. Dragon said they would have to be satisfied with getting rid of Oslo High School. He said they would issue a wanted notice and continue to chase Theo Christiansen. Theo was walking down the sewer, breathing heavily. Clenching his fist, he cursed loudly. He didn't expect them to care about any orcs or goblins. Killing too many orcs was a mistake. As the orcs who mainly supplied the manual labor disappeared, the problems within the industrial sectors began to rise. Theo thought that they were starting to act like this was causing problems for them, but they had no interest in orcs to begin with. Those hypocrites. It was raining over the slums. One orc asked another if he had heard about Oslo High being destroyed. He said that he had heard that the Immigration Bureau and Elder Dragons had worked together. He asked about the fact that even so they had not been able to catch Theo Christiansen. Theo picked up a newspaper from the ground. The orc, calling him a cockroach, said that he hoped he would be caught and killed as soon as possible. It's too hard to face both the Immigration Bureau and the Elder Dragons together. Theo thought he needed to get rid of the weakest of them first. He decided to start with the agent from the Immigration Bureau, Minjun, who, like him, is a dark mage who betrayed his kind to live as a parasite under the dragons. Remembering his face, Theo thought he would be the first. To get revenge on him, Theo needed more power and more victims. That's why the partnership with the Human Rights Alliance worked so well. Because they both wanted the pain and blood of monsters. Theo said he would take care of Princess Vermi's bodyguard. Standing in front of the orc chained to the cross, he said that he would make sure that he would not be disappointed. As Theo received the request in regards to Princess Vermi from the Union, he had no reason to reject it, since the time has come for him to exact revenge on him. Even the red dragon who was covering for him isn't on Earth. Spreading his arms to the sides, looking at the red light, Theo thanked the god. With a crazy smile, he thanked God for giving him this opportunity. Theo looked at Minjun, clenching his fists in despair. He yelled about how this doesn't make sense. He wondered if he could imagine how many sacrifices he had made. A shot of purple energy pierced through his chest, leaving a hole in it. Minjun's hand glowed slightly with purple magic. Theo, cursing, fell to the ground. Getting up from the ground, he questioned why he was still alive after using such strong dark magic. Theo angrily shouted that dark magic is an art done through killing and sacrifice, and it should not be used the way he does by sacrificing himself. Looking at the protagonist's hand, he said, "You should be dead by now, but how?" Smiling hysterically, Theo shouted that he must have sold his body to a dragon, and through that he got such a strong life force. He questioned if he could even call himself a true dark mage at that. The protagonist, putting the knife blade to his hand, asked about a true dark wizard. Letting the blood drain from his hand, he said that dark magic was originally meant to be used that way. Theo looked at him in shock. Lowering his head, he asked if it was really meant to be used this way. Looking at his hand, Theo said since it's already turned out like this, he too will try what he said. Tearing up his chest and smiling madly, shrouded in a purple aura, he shouted, "True dark magic."